Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 terrifying graveyard incidents that always happen on Halloween, we return to the quiet edges of the world, where the hum of the living fades, and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the confessions of those who tend the dead, caretakers who have seen candles flicker in sealed mausoleums, heard their names whispered from empty plots, and felt unseen hands brush past them in the dark. Every account you're about to hear comes from those who walk among the tombstones after midnight. People who have buried their fear along with the bodies. And yet still know, not everything buried stays silent. My goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers listen and disappear without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath. And let us begin. I'm not posting this for attention. I'm posting it because I can't sleep without listening for the wind anymore. And if anyone else lives near a graveyard, especially Ravenwood, maybe you'll listen a little harder too. I live in a small town where everyone eventually learns the shortcuts. The alley behind the hardware store that gets you to Main Street without the stoplight, the footbridge across the creek that shaves 10 minutes off your walk to the high school, and the path that cuts along the iron fence of Ravenwood Cemetery. It's older than the houses around it, older than the asphalt, older than our streetlights. The ironwork is black with age, decorated with little finials shaped like spearheads. Someone painted them gold once. The paint flaked off years ago, but in daylight you can still see the dull sheen where it used to be. When the wind is right, the fence hums. My apartment backs up to the cemetery's east side. People tell me that's a weird choice, but the rent is cheap, and when I first moved in, the quiet felt like a blessing. No bar noise, no heavy traffic, just trees. The occasional church bell from St. Bartholomew's and the groundskeeper riding his mower in slow rectangles. I learned his name the first week, Carl. Tall, balding, always in the same green jacket no matter the season. He didn't talk much, but he would nod if you waved. I liked that about him. This happened last Halloween. I was 26, working second shift at a distribution center that ships household stuff. Soap, paper towels, light bulbs. Boring but steady. My schedule that week had me off on the 31st, which was fine by me. My friend group does what most adults do now for Halloween. Cheap costumes, streaming horror movies, someone's crock-pot chili. My best friend Liv had just broken up with a guy and didn't want to be around couples, so we decided to skip the bigger party and do our own little thing at my place. She said she'd bring snacks. I said I'd make a decent playlist and find a scary story or two to read out loud. We used to do that in high school, way before podcasts made it cool. Around noon, I got a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized the name in the preview. You still by Ravenwood? JJ was my neighbor in the building, 3rd floor, always jogging. We hung out sometimes when our schedules overlapped, usually when he locked himself out and needed my balcony to step over to his, or when I needed a spare coffee filter and he had 5. I replied, yeah, same place, what's up? He said he'd heard something weird that morning on his run along the fence. Voices, he wrote. Not like kids. Like, older? He added a shrug emoji like he was embarrassed, and I asked if he was messing with me. He wrote back, wish I was, and then, might be the wind. But the fence was cold. Like freezer cold, it was cold that day, sure. The first real bite of fall. But freezer cold? I told him to stop touching fences and come by later for hot cider. He said he'd swing by after his shift ended at the hardware store. Liv showed up around 4 with plastic grocery bags, and a face that said she'd cried in the car. She's the kind of person who talks with her whole body, and that day even the way she set the bags down, careful, precise, told me she was trying not to break. I made her tea. She told me the breakup story again, the version that included the secret parts. I listened. We built a playlist together. We laughed a little when Monster Mash came up and immediately deleted it. By 6 it was dark, and the doorbell started acting like it always does on Halloween, trying to pretend we're still surrounded by kids. I had 1 bag of mini Snickers ready. We got exactly 4 trick-or-treaters, 2 tiny witches, a shy Batman, and a kid in a cardboard box that said, 404 costume not found. The last one made Liv actually laugh. Around 7, Jay texted that he was running late and would be there by 8:30. We decided to walk out for a bit just to feel the cold. I grabbed my coat. Liv grabbed hers and my scarf because she always forgets something, and it's usually her own scarf. The shortcut path runs along the cemetery fence and then cuts down to the little park with the gazebo and some benches where teenagers make out. Our breath came out in clouds. Across the street, St. Bartholomew's had a light on in the bell tower. The wind had that breathy sound that makes you feel like your hearing is about to pop, like you're in an airplane and something's about to change pressure. "Let's walk the fence," Liv said. She said it like a joke, but she was squeezing my arm too tight. I didn't want to. I did it anyway. We paused where the path curves and the iron bars form a perfect corner. The name on the arch over the main gate is flaked and crooked. Ravenwood. A few of the letters face the wrong direction, like someone salvaged them from a different sign. The gate was locked with a heavy chain. Beyond it, rows of headstones rose and fell with the land. Some were simple blocks sunk close to the earth. Others were taller and older, carved into shapes that don't get made anymore. Tree trunks cut flat at the top, angels with melted faces, lambs sleeping on pillows. The new section is on the west side, with shiny granite that reflects the sky. In the east, where we stood, the ground is uneven, riddled with roots that push stone out of alignment. When the wind blew, leaves rattled across the tops of the markers like someone shuffling a deck of cards. "Do you hear it?" Liv asked. I wanted to say no, I did. At first, all I caught was the leaves, the distant sound of someone's TV through a window and a dog barking twice and then stopping like it had been told to hush. Then the fence hummed. It vibrated through my fingers before my ears understood it. There's no other way to say it. The iron sang, low, a soft chord, air passing through metal. The hairs on my wrists stood up and I pulled my hands away. Liv whispered, "It's like a throat." I had that dumb instinct to say, "It's the wind," because that's what people say to keep the night from getting bigger. But the next gust came and the hum rose, and layered under it I heard something else. Not words. Not at first. The shape words make when someone talks in another room and you can't hear what they're saying. The rhythm of conversation. I found myself leaning toward it like it was a radio signal I could tune if I just moved right. We stood there for I don't know how long. Maybe a minute. Maybe 5. My ears began to pick out threads. The sound wasn't everywhere. It came from specific places, pockets of air, the way your sinus cavities sometimes catch a whistle when you exhale. Liv moved her head and her eyes widened. She squeezed my arm. "Right there," she said, pointing at a short headstone with a chipped corner. She looked spooked enough that I started to worry she'd run, and the last thing I wanted was to chase her down a dark sidewalk like a movie cliché. "Let's go back," I said. She nodded. We turned away from the fence. As we did, we both heard it, a breath that wasn't the wind, right behind our names, like someone standing just over our shoulders trying out our sounds for the first time. "Liv," the air said, soft, almost tasting the I don't remember deciding to grab the fence, but my gloved hand closed around the iron bar by instinct, and for half a second the cold burned right through the fabric so hard I saw stars. My name lifted like a sigh. "Mara." Liv said something like, "Don't," and then she yanked me hard, and we were walking fast, too fast, our boots scuffing, not running but close. We didn't talk until we were back inside with the deadbolt pushed home. There's this thing your brain does when you're scared and trying to be normal. It throws you at tasks. We made cider. We oversugared it. We set out chips and pretzels like we were feeding a small army that was late. We clicked through streaming menus and pretended to care about plot summaries. I kept listening for the hum without meaning to. Every pansy little noise, the fridge kicking on, the vent in the bathroom, made me think of the fence. Being inside didn't help. It made me feel like a kid hiding under a blanket, while something sits on the edge of your bed and waits for you to breathe. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. I jumped so hard my phone slid off the coffee table. It was Jay, grinning, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He held up a paper bag. "Pumpkin donuts," he said, like a peace offering. Then he saw our faces. "Okay," he said. "You heard it too." We told him what happened in a mess of overlapping sentences. He listened without interrupting. That's another thing I like about Jay. He's good at absorbing words. When we finished, he set the donuts down and said, "I went earlier and thought I was losing it." I figured I'd go back after work and, I don't know, see if it was still there. Why would you go back? Liv asked, like the question itself was insane. Jay shrugged. Because if I don't, I'll lie awake and think I'm a coward. It's Halloween. It's probably some weird acoustics with the trees. He glanced at me, or it's something else. Either way, I don't want to spend a week inventing explanations. He has that impulse I recognize to push at the thing that scares you. Not because you're brave exactly, but because not knowing is worse. I wanted to say yes. I also didn't want to go near that fence again. While I hesitated, Liv said, I'm not going. But bring me back a completely normal explanation. Then she grabbed my sleeve. You don't have to go either. I looked at Jay. He didn't push. He looked a little relieved, like maybe he didn't want to go alone, but he had prepared to. I said, give me 5 minutes to find a flashlight. We bundled up. Liv muttered, this is so dumb, and handed us both knit hats from my basket by the door. If you hear anything with my name again, she added, don't say anything back. She said it casually, but her eyes asked for more than a promise. I promised. The street was nearly empty at 9. The church bell didn't ring on the half hour anymore, budget cut. The night felt thinner somehow, like if you pushed your hand out too far, your fingers would go right through it. We walked side by side. Jay carried the flashlight. I carried nothing, which made me feel weirdly naked, like I should have brought salt or a Bible or a key. When we reached the fence, we stopped a few feet back. The iron looked almost gray in the moonlight. The wind had died down a little, which made me think we'd hear nothing at all. I almost hoped for that. But as we stood there, a breath ran along the bars like someone dragging a finger down a piano, and the hum began again. Jay whispered, okay, that's a noise. But he moved closer. It's not just wind. He put his ear near a slit between bars like he was listening at a door. I wanted to pull him back. Another pocket of air tuned itself and something poured through it. This time I heard the shape of words in a tone that was painfully familiar, like a smell you can't place that belongs to childhood. I leaned in before I could stop myself, and the cold hit me again, deep in the cartilage curve of my ear. Left the light on, a voice said. I stepped back so fast I almost fell. I know I heard that exact sentence, that exact voice in my apartment the day I moved in. My mother, handing me a box marked kitchen, laughing at herself because she'd flicked on the light in an empty cabinet like anything would need it. She died 2 years ago. Car accident. Fast, clean, the words people use when they mean you don't get to say goodbye. I said no. I said it too loudly, like I could shove the sound away. Jay looked at me. What? The hum shifted. A different pocket opened, and I watched his face change. He went very still. He swallowed. That's my... He didn't finish. What is it saying? I asked. He shook his head. It's not... It's just... He blinked hard. It's just my dad telling me to check the oil before winter. I stared at him. It's exactly the kind of thing his dad would say. I know that because earlier in October, Jay had borrowed my funnel, and when he returned it, he told me a story about the way his dad practically worshipped the car manual. You can love someone a lot, and they can still sound like a broken record. The fence had found the record. Jay moved the flashlight over the first few rows. The beam bounced against stone faces with names half sunk. Sloan, Dealey, Hart. It felt wrong to blast the light across them, like shining into a sleeping person's eyes. But the black between the trees was worse. Maybe it's reflecting, Jay said. Like how you hear someone on a baby monitor from a house over. Then where's the source? I asked. My mom's house is an hour away. Your dad lives in Indiana, right? He didn't answer. He was listening again. On our right, a darker shape moved beyond the bars. I tightened my grip on my pockets, thinking it was a deer, but it paused where the path inside splits in a Y around a cluster of stones. It stood very still. Then the lantern came on. The flame was small and greenish, like it was fighting through glass. The man holding it wore the same green jacket I'd seen all year. Carl, the groundskeeper. He didn't look surprised to see us. He looked like he'd been expecting someone, and we had finally arrived. When he was close enough that the light hit his face, I felt relief and something else. He looked older. Not in that way where people look different at night. I mean older. His skin sagged at the jaw, and the tufts of hair at his temples had turned a shock white since morning. He stopped at the bars and lifted the lantern a little higher. We were separated by the fence, 2 feet of air, and about 100 years. You shouldn't be out here tonight, he said. His voice was hoarse like he hadn't used it in a while. I had only ever seen him nod. Jay said, "We heard," Carl said. "I know what you heard." He turned his head to listen the way a dog does, like he was catching sounds we couldn't. The hum wasn't constant anymore. It came in pulses. You could almost map it. One voice here, another there, like stars you only see when you don't look straight at them. "What is it?" I asked. Carl shifted the lantern so the light fell on his hands. They were filthy with soil, black under the nails, the kind of dirt you never get out. "Pressure," he said finally. "That's one word for it. The ground swells when the air's dry and the cold's just right. Opens little seams you don't usually notice. Air moves through places and picks up shapes." "Shapes?" Jay echoed. "Of words," Carl said. He glanced at a row behind him where sunken stones leaned together like gossiping old ladies. "Of letters. The names chipped in these markers. The grooves collect sound. The right kind of wind finds a way to read them out loud." I almost laughed because it sounded like the kind of ghost story an electrician tells. Wires humming, nothing more. But then he turned the lantern toward the corner where the oldest section slumps, and he added, like an afterthought, "It reads other things too." "What other things?" I asked. "The ones that aren't carved in stone," he said. He started walking along the inside of the fence. We followed on the sidewalk. When he reached the main gate, he slid a key from his pocket and worked at the chain. My first thought was that we couldn't go in, that it was illegal. And my second thought was, of course we were going in. We'd already crossed whatever line mattered. He unhooked the chain, pushed the gate enough to slip through, and then, without asking us to, he held it so we could pass inside. I hesitated one heartbeat, then went. Jay came after. Being in there felt different than standing outside looking in. It should have felt like a park with rocks, but instead it felt like a room with a ceiling too low to see. The hum was louder, but it wasn't volume, it was closeness. The lantern made a circle of light around Carl's boots and a smaller one around his hand where the flame shone through his skin. He led us to the stone with the chipped corner. Up close I could make out the name. Dorothy Hale, 1918-1936. The letters were shallow and smoothed by weather. There were old coins on top, green with age. "Listen," Carl said. He didn't lower the lantern, but he let the beam fall just wide enough that we could see the ground in front of us. The grass there was flat, and in a few places the dirt had a ripple like someone had pressed a hand into it and then pulled back. I crouched without meaning to. I put my palm just above the grass. The air was warmer there, strangely, like the opposite of the fence. I could hear it again, not my name now and not my mother's voice. This was a different sound, closer to singing but not musical. A woman's murmur, fast and urgent like prayer said wrong. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt the meaning in the way my stomach dropped. The sensation was exactly like the moment you realize you missed the bottom step in the dark. Jay stood on my other side. "I don't like this," he said. His voice sounded small. "It's like eavesdropping." Carl nodded as if he agreed. "I tell folks to stay away Halloween night, most do. But every year a few think they want to hear. They don't." He looked at me. "You'll think you do. You'll think there's something you need to know. But there isn't, not like this. What happens if you keep listening?" I asked. I didn't mean to ask it. The words came out of me like the air was drawing them. He looked down at the ground instead of at me. The lantern flame fluttered. "People hear their secrets said back to them," he said quietly. "Not all of them were theirs to keep. That's one problem. The other is the ones who ask you questions you can't answer." "What does that mean?" Jay asked. Carl didn't reply. He walked ahead, letting the lantern describe a slow arc. He stopped where a wider headstone lay half buried, tilted up like a broken tooth. The name was gone. Someone had tried to scrub it clean of time and only erased it further. Between the stone and the next, the grass was sparse and the dirt showed. The hum thickened there, like a throat clearing. "Every year," Carl said, "there's a grave that sinks a little more." He tapped the soft spot with his boot, and then stepped back. "Every year folks come ask me why. I tell them the ground moves. They look at me like I'm lying. I'm not." A gust crossed the cemetery from east to west, and all at once the hum sharpened into syllables. They were too many. It was like standing in the center of a crowded train station with every announcement, conversation, and cough layered on top of you. I heard a child sobbing and someone laughing, the kind of laugh you make when you don't know what else to do. I heard a voice say very distinctly, "Turn the stove off." And for a second I panicked, thinking I'd left something on in my kitchen. Then I remembered I didn't cook. Not tonight anyway. The voices tumbled, crossed, braided, and unbraided again. And through them, thin and silver, something threaded its way toward me the way a needle finds the soft part of skin. Mara. It said my name again, and this time it didn't sound like someone trying on a shape. It sounded like someone who knew me too well. I couldn't place the voice because my brain was too full of matching it to every voice I loved. I felt something behind my eyes like a headache waking up. I turned to Carl. I thought we weren't supposed to answer. You're not, he said, and his voice was so tired I wanted to apologize for dragging him into this, except he'd dragged us. He raised the lantern and tilted it so I could see the inside of the glass. It was fogged a little. The flame wavered. For a split second, something moved inside the lantern that wasn't the wick and wasn't any reflection. It was the shape of a moth's wing, or a hand. Jay sucked in a breath. Do you see that? Don't look too long, Carl said, and I believed him without asking why. He started to say something else, but a new sound threaded itself through the rest and we all went still. It was a rhythm. 4 hard thumps, then a pause, then 4 again knocking. I hate that word in this context. It sounds cheap and movie-ish, but it was knocking. From the ground. Not everywhere. Just to our left, near the base of a small white stone that said Baby James, 1969. The knocks were stubborn, and the pause between them made me think of someone counting breaths. My God, Jay whispered. It's the roots, Carl said quickly, like a parent soothing a nervous child. They move in the frost. Jay and I stared at him. We both knew roots don't knock. The knocks stopped as suddenly as they started. In the new quiet, the youngest of the voices rose up like it had been waiting worsted by the others. It was high like a flute note. I couldn't make out words at first. Then I did. The gate, the voice said, please. The gate. Carl moved as if to go, but his legs stuttered like the command hit him and then got snagged on something. He set the lantern down on the soil. We're leaving, he said to us. Now. We took a step backward. The ground under my boot gave in a little, like a mattress where the springs fail. I think that was the first time I understood that the cemetery is not just a yard with stones, but a layered place. You can stand in it and be standing on hundreds of years at once. When you press down in one spot, something else rises somewhere else. From behind us, closer to the gate, the chain rattled even though no one was touching it. The sound made the little bones in my ear ring. The baby stone shifted with a sigh like a person standing up after a long time sitting. The lantern's flame flared and went long, as if wind had found a crack to run through, and then, without going out, it dimmed to a thin green bead. Carl said very quietly, "Don't look behind you." I looked anyway. I always look. There's a reason mirrors in horror movies make my stomach go cold. You always want to confirm you're still here. The gate was open the way we'd left it, just a single width. But the chain had looped itself higher up, tight, like it had found a new notch. At the top, a twist of wire snared around one of the finials and pulled it down hard enough to screech. The sound was awful. It went through my teeth. Someone whispered right next to my ear. I left the light on. My body moved before my brain did. I said, "I know," in the tone you use to calm a person in a hallway, and instantly, the air pressed in around my mouth and I tasted dirt. Not a smell, a taste. Cold, iron-rich, like a coin under your tongue. Carl's hand clamped onto my shoulder and yanked me sideways. "Don't answer," he hissed. "You don't want to be counted." "Counted?" Jay said. I heard him, but I couldn't see him. The light had gone strange, too thin, too green. It blurred the edges of everything and made the stones look wet. It made the inscriptions stand up in high relief like scratches. "When you talk back," Carl said, "you help them tally." He lifted the lantern. It glowed a little brighter. They don't read us as people. They read us as marks, and what do they want? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like it had traveled a long way in cold air. "The same thing we all want," Carl said, "which is to not be alone." He didn't say the other part out loud, but I heard it anyway. And they don't mind trading places. Jay grabbed my sleeve. "Mara," he said, his voice back in my ear, desperate now. "Please, let's go." We walked, then we jogged, and then we were running without having decided to. The gate seemed farther than it should be. Like the cemetery had added a few yards just to see what we'd do. As we moved, the voices rose, maybe angry, maybe pleading, maybe just louder because wind makes everything worse. My mother's tone threaded through again, sharper. This time it wasn't words I knew. It was the way she used to say my name when I was about to step into the street without looking. At the gate, Jay pushed at the chain and fumbled it loose. He did it so fast his fingers bled. I didn't see blood. I felt warmth on the back of his hand when it brushed mine. Carl didn't help. He kept the lantern up like a ward and watched the stones like they might move. When the chain fell, we squeezed through. On the sidewalk, the night felt ordinary again in that way that makes you doubt your eyes. The voices cut off as sharply as if someone had stopped a recording. The hum dropped to a dull note and then faded out. We stood there breathing like we'd run miles. Jay laughed in those little breathless bursts people make when they've cried and are pretending they didn't. "I'm fine," he said. He said it twice. He wasn't. Carl relocked the gate with careful hands. When he turned to us, the lantern flared up brighter for a second and his face looked younger again, as if leaving some of that air behind had taken years off him. He caught me looking and said, "You didn't answer before, did you?" I shook my head, realizing I had, and he nodded anyway. "Good," he said. "Most don't listen." "Why do you stay?" I asked. It wasn't what I meant to say, but it was what came out. "On Halloween, I mean. Someone has to keep the gate closed," he said simply. He lifted the lantern to check the lock again. "And someone has to keep count." "You said not to be counted," Jay said. "I know what I said." Carl studied the chain one more time, then pocketed the key. "You two need to go home. Don't stop at the fence. Don't listen for anything. Turn your TVs up too loud." His eyes went distant, looking past us down the street like he saw something we didn't yet. "And don't answer if you hear your names." We walked home slowly, not because we wanted to, but because moving fast felt like it would break the night into sharper edges. When we got to my building, Liv threw the door open before I even put my key in the lock. Her face was a new color I'd never seen on her, something like pale blue. "I heard you," she said, and then she swayed like she might throw up. I put my hand on her shoulder. "What do you mean?" I asked. She swallowed. "I heard you talking. In here." She tapped her ear. "Like you were at the bottom of a pool. You said my name and then you said, 'It's okay. Come home.' And then," she stopped. "You don't own a cuckoo clock, right?" "No," I said. "I kept hearing one." She stood aside so we could come in. The TV was on, loud enough for the neighbors to complain, tuned to a cooking show with the hosts laughing too hard. "It stopped when you walked up the stairs," she added. I didn't know what to do, so I turned up the volume. We sat down without taking off our coats. We ate the donuts Jay had brought, even though they tasted like nothing, because eating felt like something people do when they're alive. At some point, Jay laughed again, this time with more sound, and said, "I'm going to have nightmares about that lantern," and then apologized to no one for saying it out loud. Around midnight, the laughter from the cooking show hit a rhythm that made me think about the knocking again, and I turned it off. The apartment was too quiet without it, so I put on a playlist of old songs my mother liked. They sounded safe in a way almost nothing else did. Jay fell asleep sitting up. The cut on his knuckle had stopped bleeding but left a dark line. Liv stayed wide awake, her eyes like glass marbles. Just before 2, someone down on the street banged a car door and all 3 of us flinched. When we finally decided the night had gotten as far from Halloween as it was going to get, I walked Jay to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. "Do you think?" he started, then shook his head. "Never mind." "What?" I asked. "Do you think they can get in?" he asked. He tried to make it sound like a joke. It didn't. I said the thing you say. I said no. Then I said, "We locked the gate." He nodded like he wanted to believe me. After he left, I sat on the floor with my back against the door for a long time. I listened for the fence. I told myself the hum couldn't reach this far. The night finally thinned enough that you could almost see morning tucked under it like paper beneath fabric. Maybe you think this is where I say I heard the voices one more time, or the lantern showed up on my windowsill, or my phone recorded something in my sleep. That didn't happen. What did happen is smaller and worse. At dawn, I made coffee. I stood at the sink and watched the steam curl. I was trying to think of something ordinary to text my boss so I wouldn't say the true thing, which was, "I'm not okay." Across the room, my lamp was still on, one of those cheap ones with a pull chain. I could have sworn I turned it off. I went to switch it and froze with my hand in the air. Someone had tied a knot in the pull chain. Not a complicated knot, just a simple overhand like a kid makes on the first try. The kind my mother used to untie absent-mindedly when she called me on Sunday nights. She always said she needed to keep her hands busy so she wouldn't talk too much. The knot was tight. My fingers couldn't work it loose. I stood there for a long time, not touching it. Around 9, I looked out the back window at the cemetery. From this angle, I could see the gate. Carl stood by it with his green jacket and his lantern still going in daylight like it didn't know the rules. He looked smaller from here. For a second, something about his posture made my stomach fall again. It wasn't until he moved that I realized it wasn't Carl. The jacket was the wrong shade. The shoulders were wrong. The man by the gate had a head full of dark hair. I blinked hard. When I looked again, it was Carl. Of course it was, because who else would it be? And the lantern wasn't lit at all. It was just glass catching the sun. I haven't walked the fence since. I take the long way around, even if it means being late. I haven't talked to Jay about it again beyond the polite lie that we were overreacting. Liv won't come over after dark unless I meet her downstairs. She brings her own headphones and keeps one earbud in like a talisman. I called the cemetery office a week later to ask when Carl worked. A woman answered. I could hear papers shuffling like wings. When I asked for him, she went quiet for a second in that particular way that means bad news is coming. She told me Carl passed years ago. Heart attack in the west section by the new stones. She said his nephew keeps things up now part-time. But folks still ask about Carl because he was such a fixture, her words, like he was one of the statues. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I talked to him on Halloween. I wanted to tell her about the lantern. Instead, I thanked her and hung up and sat at my kitchen table and stared at the knot in the lamp chain. I could untie it, I should. It's been there long enough that it's collecting dust. But every time I reach for it, I hear that soft shift of syllables, a voice trying my name on like a borrowed coat, and I step back, and I leave the light on. I don't know what exactly happens at Ravenwood on Halloween. I have the groundskeeper's explanation and the other one, the one that doesn't live well in words. I know the fence hums and the stones read things back to you that you didn't think anyone kept. I know there's a grave that sinks a little each year like a mouth trying to form a sound. I know that if you answer, something notices. Maybe it only counts you. Maybe it learns how to untie your name. This year I'll be working the night shift on October 31st. I volunteered. I told my boss I needed the overtime. That part is true. The other part is truer. I don't want to be home when the air gets cold enough to find a voice. I don't want to be walking past the fence when the wind tries my name again. Better this time, practiced. If you live near Ravenwood, lock your windows. Turn your TV up too loud. Don't walk the fence. And if you hear your mother or your father or the person you lost whispering that they left the light on, please don't answer. Because sometimes the only thing between you and whatever's on the other side of that fence is the simple act of keeping count. And sometimes the person doing that job is tired, and sometimes they're not there at all. People talk about our cemetery the way they talk about potholes and the weird smell that floats up from the river in August, like it's just another nuisance the town lives with. It sits on a small rise behind the high school football field. A wedge of ground fenced with an old iron gate that clings to orange paint like rust is a color choice. On good days, it looks like a postcard. Oaks shaking their leaves into the wind, the kind of sky you'd paint with big white brush strokes. On the other days, the ones that matter for this story, the hill looks more like it's holding its breath. I moved back to Hallowell last fall when my dad's knees finally decided they weren't up for ladders anymore. He ran the hardware store for 32 years. I took the upstairs apartment and pretended the creaks at night were just the building adjusting to me. You can be gone from a place for long enough to forget the way it sounds, but not long enough to forget what it's like to be watched. In Hallowell, the thing watching isn't a person. It's the hill. It's the gate. Every year, this is the part people laugh about if they don't live here. A red balloon appears tied to the bars. Not a bouquet, not a cluster. One. It shows up between the last Sunday in October and Halloween night. You see it driving to school, jogging the track, bringing flowers to your dad's grave. Someone always says Pennywise like they're the first to make the joke. Someone always tells them to shut up. And then at some point the balloon gets popped. Not by a person usually. It just thins in the cold and snaps against a thorn or the iron finial. If you look fast, if you know to look, there's a name written inside. It's always a child. Always one we buried that year. No one posts about that part on Facebook. It isn't a story you tell with emojis. The first time I saw a name I was 12. My best friend Leah dared me to kick the balloon as we cut behind the cemetery after practice. It blew sideways, snagged on a branch, and went with a sad little wheeze. I remember the smell, like party stores and pennies. The latex caught the light and I saw it. Blocky handwriting, Sharpie bleeding at the edges. Michael Wright. Mike had drowned in Quarry Lake late that spring. We'd just planted a tree for him behind the gym. The ink wasn't tidy. It looked hurried, like the person writing couldn't get the letters out fast enough. Leah and I ran home without saying anything. We never told anyone. When you're 12, you already understand that some things bend the world too far, and if you tell, they snap it. I left for college. Leah married a guy who fixes HVAC for a living and had twins. Marcus, my other best friend back then, became a cop, which I still have trouble squaring with the kid who used to steal traffic cones and stack them on the principal's porch. Hallowell kept its seasons like a promise. Balloons kept coming like bills in the mail. When I came back last fall, I tried to decide it was a coincidence that felt like a story. The names, the timing. I even said that out loud to my dad while I grilled cheese on his old cast iron, like testing how it sounded in the room. He just looked at the TV and said, "Do me a favor and don't stay too long by that gate after dark." He never said things like that when I was a teenager. He says them now. There's a groundskeeper for Hillcrest, Earl, who has a key to the little maintenance shed where they keep the cold season fake flowers and the flag holders with the round medallions. Earl's the kind of man who knows exactly where everything is but still acts surprised to find it. He was in Vietnam. He walks like he's checking the ground for wires. People think he's strange because he has opinions about birds and talks to the deer like he's owed rent. But if you bring him coffee, he'll tell you the consensus on the balloon is kids with nothing to do and too much internet. Then he'll change the subject so fast you think there must be a rule about it. This is the timeline. October 24th last year, a Sunday. After closing the shop, I drove up to the school to run the track. It was almost dusk, the sky a cheap bruise, and the air had that metal chill that says the window for pumpkin patches is closing. I passed the cemetery and saw it. The balloon, red enough to feel fake in the fading light, tied with white bakery string to the middle of the gate. It bobbed with that hungry, floaty insistence helium gives. I kept moving. I told myself I was just cataloging. October 25th, Monday. A car slowed on the road. 2 kids yelled out the window, "Loser balloon," and a mom voice shouted, "Language." I watched from the hardware store's broom closet window as Leah, in her minivan with decals of tiny soccer balls, stopped at the light and did not look up the hill. October 26th, Tuesday. I brought Earl a coffee and we stood under the black maple near the gate. "It's early this year," he said, looking not at the balloon but at the horizon like it might explain itself. "Wind will take it by Thursday. They always do." "Who ties it?" I asked. Earl took off his cap and ran a thumb along the sweatband. "Who ties a lot of things," he said. "You know what I mean." I waited, but that was the kind of explanation Earl offers. A shape instead of a name. That night, around 10:30, my apartment window squeaked like someone had leaned a hand against it. Nothing dramatic. Just a weight checking to see if the glass was tired. When I pulled the curtain, there was no one outside, just Main Street asleep and a stray napkin stuck to the curb. But on the inside of the glass, where the condensation had caught, a circle had been traced, and down from it a trembling line. Not big, the kind a kid makes when they've only just learned how to draw the string. The town had only buried one child that year, a little girl named Evie whose face had been on missing posters all August. Her mom stood outside the grocery store until the cold came, handing out flyers that crumpled at the edges and turned to soft paper from too much humidity. They found Evie's body 10 days before school started. I won't talk about how. The balloon for that year should have said Evie. I thought about that the whole time I brushed my teeth and tried not to look up at the window. October 27th, Wednesday. The balloon popped. I wasn't there when it happened. Marcus was. He was parked behind the bleachers, finishing a drive-through dinner because he says the station kitchen smells like somebody microwaved their shoes. He called me after, his voice tucked inside a laugh he didn't actually feel. "You remember how we used to freak ourselves out about that balloon?" he said. "Used to?" "It popped while I was watching," he said. "Nobody near it." It went like, he made a soft, flubby sound, and I swear to God something fell out of it. "What?" "Paper," he said. "Or maybe it was just..." "I don't know. It looked like a word fell. Isn't that stupid? I told him it wasn't stupid. I started walking toward the hill without realizing. By the time I got there, the balloon had shrunk to a red shred snarled around the bars, and the part that held the helium had drifted into the grass. I kicked at it gently, the way you do with worms after a storm. The latex was thin as breath. And there it was inside, not on a paper but written directly on the rubber, pulled and puckered now. Not Evie. Not any name. The space where the letters should have been was blank, like someone had wiped the ink with a wet fingertip before it dried. Marcus leaned on the gate. Maybe they forgot their marker. Maybe, I said. Behind us, footsteps. I turned, expecting a jogger, a couple out for a walk. No one. I listened hard and heard it again, small, quick taps. I thought of raccoons. I thought of the way squirrels sound heavier when you know there's something to fear. We stood like that for too long. Long enough that you have to admit something is making you stay. Marcus had his hand on the gate. He's not the type you picture spooked. He wears his uniform like it's a puzzle he solved. But he kept trying to push his fingers through the iron scrollwork and failing. "Let's go," he finally said. Then he changed his mind the way you change lanes too late. "You hear about the thing the kids do with the balloon?" he asked. "What thing?" "They say if you write a name inside, it stops looking for one." He glanced at me. "Rumor says if there's no name, the balloon picks." "Picks what?" I asked, even though I knew. He didn't answer. We left. I slept with my light on. The apartment's radiators sounded like they were learning a new language and practicing through the walls. October 28th, Thursday. We got our first frost. The football team's parents did a breakfast fundraiser on the corner by the bank, and they burned the bacon so the whole block smelled like the memory of a campfire. People kept glancing up at the hill. Earl put out a sawhorse and a handwritten sign, "Please no standing by the gate." He told me later he did it to get folks to keep moving, to cut the eyes that made the air feel thin. That afternoon, Leah came by the store. She had a crumpled list and forgot what was on it the second she walked in. "I pass it every morning," she said, not saying what it was because she didn't have to. It's like having a thought you can't finish. "You know those?" I did. She said the weirdest part wasn't the balloon this year. "It's that I keep seeing that kid," she said. "Which one?" I asked. "You know," she said. "The one with the hair that sticks up. The clothes that don't fit the season. The balloon that looks like it's been patched. He's always on the other side of the fence, and then I look again and he isn't." She laughed without humor. "I sound like my aunt." "You remember her. She thought my mom's toaster was haunted." "What do you mean, patched?" I asked. Leah frowned, like the detail had surprised even her. "Like you do with a bike inner tube," she said. "Only who patches a balloon?" That night on my way back from closing, I saw him. There's no more dramatic way to tell it. He stood by the gate inside the fence facing the road. He was small, but not a toddler. Black hair doing the thing where it tries to be a crown. Jacket too thin for the cold. In one hand, he held the string of a balloon that wasn't floating so much as shrugging. The balloon's skin was dull, not shiny store red, and there were darker shapes on it like thumbprints of glue. He saw me and did what kids do. Pretended he hadn't, then looked again to make sure he still existed in my eyes. I slowed. Rolled the window down because it felt like not doing so would be rude. "Hey, buddy," I said, half expecting a parent to materialize with a wave. "You okay?" He cocked his head. "Do you have any string?" he asked. His voice sounded like a radio with a bad antenna, close but with edges that crackled. Maybe," I said. "In the glove compartment. A packet of mints, a dead pen, registration papers, a loop of twine I didn't remember putting there." I held it up. "This?" he nodded. Came closer. Up close, his jacket wasn't a jacket but a hoodie, badly washed. The balloon string in his hand ended in a knot that looked undone and redone so many times it had become an idea of a knot. He pushed the end of the twine toward me, and only then did I notice his nail beds were rimmed in gray dust, like he'd crawled on gravel. "Sorry if this is a weird question," I said as I fed the twine through the iron bars. "What's your name?" He smiled the way kids do when adults try to track them with a flashlight, and they decide to duck. "It doesn't hold if you say it," he said. "It's not how you think it is." "What isn't?" I said. "The air," he said. He pulled on the knot I'd made as if testing a tooth. "It goes out if you tell the truth." I don't know what made me look at the balloon just then, but I did. Up close, I could see that the dullness wasn't dirt. It was the texture of something fixed. Small taped patches overlapped like fish scales. Someone had mended it again and again. There were pinholes in a cluster along one side. A constellation that looked half like freckles, half like someone had stabbed the thing with a safety pin. "Where are your parents?" I asked. He looked toward the hill behind him as if I were being funny and he didn't want to reward the joke. Then he lifted the balloon as if to say, "This is what matters. This is the point." When I looked back down at the knot, he was gone. Not the way people mean when they just don't notice someone walking away. I mean, that 1 second I was tying, and the next my hands were empty and the twine was loose and the space inside the fence was just space. The balloon bobbed. The iron was cold under my fingers and the cold felt like a warning you only understand afterward. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell Leah. I didn't tell anyone. That's how this town works. You swallow and it sits. October 29th, Friday. The schools did their costume parades. The doctor on Main put a bowl of toothbrushes by the door like always. By noon, someone had taped a sign to the cemetery's sawhorse. "Do not pop the balloon." Someone else had written underneath, "Don't tell us what to do." And then, "Seriously, don't." You try not to talk about the missing-eyed parts of your town, but they show up anyway. Parents walked their kids to school an extra block out of the way. Teenagers dared each other up to the fence and then pretended they'd only gone because the laces on their sneakers needed attention precisely there. That evening, Leah texted, "Truck or treat at the Baptist lot." "You coming?" I didn't answer. I was standing at my window looking at the circle drawn in condensation, the same way you stare at a door long after you've locked it. Around 8, the power hiccuped. Just enough for the clocks to reset. I went downstairs to the breaker because that's what you do when you live above your dad's store. You invent reasons to check that the world isn't coming apart. When I came back up, there was a voicemail waiting on my phone with no missed call. It was short, a boy's voice. Not a little boy. Not a teenager. "It doesn't hold if you say it," he whispered. Then the line made a sound like someone had put their hand over the mouthpiece and breathed through their fingers. I spent the next 2 hours doing the most normal things I could think of. Washed dishes that didn't need washing. Scrolled a year back on Instagram to look at pictures of a friend's dog. Eventually I slept October 30th, Saturday. In the morning, Leah called to say she'd dreamed of the hill the way you dream about houses you used to live in. The gate was open, she said. And it was, I don't know, wrong. Not open like someone opened it, open like it didn't know how to be closed. We were quiet for a minute. Then she said, "Don't go up there tonight." I said I wouldn't. I went anyway. Earl was there, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. The balloon was a red smudge in the dark. "Used to be a sexton in my daddy's church," he said after a while, startling me because I hadn't heard him come up beside me. Sundays he'd count the offerings, weekdays he'd dig. Funny thing about a man counting coins who also counts the ground. He said names matter more than folks want. "Even to the dead." "Even?" I said. He nodded. "Especially," he said. "It's a kind of rope. Keeps things where they belong." "What happens if you don't have one?" I asked. Earl looked at the balloon and the way it moved, as if the wind had a hand inside it. "Then someone lends you theirs," he said. "Or you take one." That night I woke to a tapping. Not my window, my door. 3 light knocks like someone who wasn't sure if they were allowed to be there. I didn't open it. I lay there counting my breaths and listening for the kind of silence that means a person has pressed their ear to the other side. After a long time, long enough for me to believe I'd imagined it, there was the sound of something sliding under the door. I waited until morning. When I finally got up, there was a length of white string on the mat. Bakery string, twisted red and white. It made a soft question mark where it fell. October 31st, Sunday. Halloween. Crisp air that made every sound snap to the edges. The whole day felt like when you're about to say a thing you can't take back. The town did our usual. Kids in superhero costumes ran shrieking at every unexpected porch skeleton. The diner offered free hot cocoa to anyone dressed as food. At 6, the sun took a step back and the hill turned the kind of dark that starts arguments in your head. I told myself I'd take a drive and then go home. I put the string in my pocket like a dare. By the time I reached the high school, there were 30 people lining the road, none of them acknowledging they were there for the same reason. You could tell who knew the real thing and who only knew the joke. The first group kept their hands in their pockets and didn't point. The second group took selfies with their heads turned so the hill sat over their shoulders like a prank. Earl paced like the Oaks owed him a late rent fee. Marcus leaned against his cruiser with the lights off. Leah stood with her twins, each dressed as a yellow pencil with a pink eraser hat. At 6:14, the balloon did a small private jerk. A sound ended and no one admitted they'd heard it. At 6:19, a gust rolled down from the football field and snapped the balloon string against the gate. At 6:21, the string broke. Not the knot, the string. It popped mid-length with a sound like a finger in a cheek. The balloon rose and stayed level with the iron spikes like it had found a shelf in the air. "No," Leah said, too loud. "No." "Back up," Marcus called, even though no one was forward. That was when the boy stepped out from behind the stone that marks the oldest part of the cemetery. I knew it was him even though the dark had done that trick where it makes faces into masks. The hoodie, the hair, the way he turned his head a little too slow. He walked to the gate and put his hand through the bars, palm up like a beggar. He didn't look at any of us. He did look at the balloon. "Do you have any string?" he asked. Leah made a sound I'd never heard come out of her. The sound of a person who understands something their brain refuses to let them understand. I felt the thing in my pocket like it had grown hands. I stepped forward. Marcus said my name. I stepped anyway. The boy tracked the movement just enough to confirm I was real. I took the bakery string out. He lifted his hand higher. "What happens if the balloon has no name?" I asked, not sure who I was asking. He didn't smile. "It takes one," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a weather report. I threaded the string through the bars. Our fingers didn't touch, not exactly. But for a second, a cold passed through me that didn't feel like temperature. It felt like standing in a doorway where the house ends and the night begins. "Whose?" I said. "If it takes one, whose?" He tipped his head toward town. "Whoever didn't make themselves heavy enough," he said. Then quieter. "Whoever isn't named right now." Leah's boys were whining about their eraser hats. A teenager in a sheet ghost costume kicked a pebble hard enough to skitter. A dad laughed at something his kid did and then remembered his laughter didn't belong here and tried to stuff it back into himself. "How do we make it heavy?" I asked. He held up the balloon. "You write it," he said simply. "You give it a name to carry." "Evie," I said. "Evie, right?" He blinked slowly. "You can't write what you already know," he said. "That's not how it works." My mouth tasted like old pennies. "I don't understand," I said. He looked at me the way kids look when adults pretend not to understand something obvious. "If the name is true," he said, "the air won't hold." He didn't mean true like accurate. He meant true like spoken aloud, like acknowledged. We'd already said Evie all summer. The balloon needed something else. Not a lie, exactly. A wait. "Write anything," someone muttered behind me. "Write mine," someone else said, a voice that sounded braver than it wanted to be. The boy didn't react to any of that. He watched me with a patience that wasn't child patience. It was the patience of a thing that takes the same route every year because it has to. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to hand the string back and go home and lock the parts of me that saw too much in a drawer. Instead, I did what people do when they don't know what to do. I looked for an adult. Earl had gone pale the way old men go pale. You notice it most around their lips. He shook his head, but it wasn't a no. It was a, "I don't have a tool for this." "Give me a marker," I said, turning. And 3 hands appeared with 3 different Sharpies at once because of course they did. I took the one that looked most used. I crouched. The boy lifted the balloon and it hovered just above my hands the way your breath hovers in winter. I pressed the tip to the matte red skin and the nib squeaked like a mouse. "What do you write?" Leah asked, voice small. I thought about Earl's rope. I thought about names as anchors. I thought about the thing the boy had said about telling the truth. I thought about wait. I thought about that voicemail. It doesn't. Hold if you say it, and how that sounded less like a rule and more like a warning against speaking something that would make the balloon useless to whatever purpose it had. Own name sat behind my teeth like a dare. I imagined walking into the dark with that weight and wondered if that was how you make yourself heavy enough not to be taken. By naming yourself when the thing that's looking doesn't get to. The idea scared me in a way I can't dress up for you. It was a kid fear, the kind you hold way down, but I wrote anyway, my hand moving without permission. Daniel. Not my name, my brother's. He died before I was born, 3 days old, 15 minutes between breaths. My mother kept his birth certificate in a drawer the way you keep a spoon from a restaurant you had your first date at. We never said his name at the dinner table. It lived in photographs and the way my dad sometimes studied the horizon. In our house, Daniel wasn't a secret, but he was private in the way a scar is private when it's under your clothes. The moment the last letter bled into the rubber, the balloon sagged. It didn't pop. It softened all at once, like something that had been holding its shape for too long remembered it didn't have to. The boy watched it with something that might have been relief and might have been grief if those two are different. He nodded very slightly as if I'd passed a test I didn't study for. "Thank you," he said, the voice on my phone but closer. Then he looked up the hill again, and for the first time since I'd seen him, his face looked like it belonged to a kid. Not a story, not a warning. A kid looking at a place he had to go back to. Leah made another sound, the kind you only make around people who knew you when you got your braces off. Marcus touched my shoulder. Earl took off his cap. "Wait," I said, "because you can't not. Who are you?" He tilted his head like the answer was the fence and the oaks and the iron and the breath gathered on cold glass. "I'm the one it didn't hold for," he said. Then he smiled, tiny and lopsided, like a string pulled too tight, or I'm borrowing his face. "Does it matter?" It didn't. It did, but it didn't. He stepped back and the wind, which had been waiting, took whatever was left of him. The balloon's skin, already heavy, slipped through my fingers and landed on the grass with a soft, consenting sound. The string I'd given him lay in a small white loop, one end tucked under as if to keep itself from unraveling. Someone behind me started to clap. Nerves. Someone else shushed them. The crowd dispersed in that weird, careful way crowds do when something just happened that they're going to tell themselves didn't. Leah's boys asked if they could have a second piece of candy now. The teenager in the sheet ghost folded their costume into a square as if tidiness could court safety. We all went home. At 11:40, while most of town was still awake, an announcement went up on the police Facebook page and over Marcus's scanner. Missing child. Last seen at the Baptist truck or treat. Red jacket, blue sneakers. Answer to Tommy. I didn't read the comments because I wanted to sleep at least a little again someday, and the comments ruined that. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I thought about the boy saying, "Whoever isn't named right now." I thought about how many ways a person can be unnamed. Lost in a crowd. Called the wrong thing, not called at all. Tommy was found at 2:13 a.m., sitting on the first step inside the cemetery gate, shoes muddy, cheeks tear-dried. He didn't remember leaving the church lot. He said a boy told him to wait with him until his grown-up came back. He said the boy's balloon made a whispering sound and wouldn't float even though it should. And he felt sad for it, the way you feel sad for a bug you know will be dead by morning. He didn't know the boy's name. He did know that the boy didn't like when he said his own name out loud. "He covered my mouth," Tommy said, wide-eyed in the kitchen light of his house, his mother shaking so hard I thought she might break apart like a dropped plate. But not in a mean way, like shh, like in a library. Marcus told me all this the next day. We stood by the condiments aisle in the grocery store so we could pretend to argue about ketchup. He didn't know I'd written Daniel. He didn't ask what I'd written. Everyone assumed I'd done something else, some ordinary useful thing like unraveled a trick knot or talked firmly to a teenager. That's the part that keeps the world together. We talk around the hole. We decorate the edges. A week later, on All Souls Day, Earl found a small flat rock on the hill near the oldest section. Someone had scratched a circle into it and a line like a balloon in a string. Underneath, they'd carved Dan, just enough of my brother's name to catch. It could have been any kid. It could have been nothing. Winter came late and mean. The hill tucked itself under snow. I stopped waking at every small sound. Sometimes I still heard a thin knock, but it was just radiators, just wind, just my heart practicing. Here's the part that won't settle. In January, a box arrived at the store with no return label. Inside was a stack of ledger paper from the 70s, edges browned. A note on top, "For your records." From the Historical Society? From a prankster? The top page was a list of names from Hillcrest in 1978, written in this neat schoolteacher hand. There was a date in March with a cluster of 6 children all on the same line. Cause of death column blank. Their names in a row like beads. The last one had no name, just 2 marks like quotation marks with nothing between them. No one recalls a tragedy in 78. That's the kind of thing you'd think would live in the town's mouth. But the ledger pages smelled like basement and truth. I showed Earl and he made the face people make when they recognize a song they don't want to remember. There was a carnival that spring, he said. They had a helium booth up by the fire hall. Tank went missing afterward. Could be nothing. Could be not nothing. I keep the pages in the drawer in my kitchen with the address labels and the takeout menus. Sometimes when the heat kicks on and makes the apartment hum, I take them out and put my finger over the quotation marks. I think about how it feels to be a mark where a name should be, about how a town can decide not to say something and the saying still happens, just differently. It's October again as I write this. Yesterday when I opened the hardware store, there was a small nick in the paint on the front door at kid height. Not a scratch, not damage, just the faintest trace circle and a line. It was already half fogged over like breath. I won't tell you not to come here if you're the kind of person who drives toward the siren instead of away. I won't tell you to stay away from the gate either. You have your own rope in your pocket. You have your own names and the weight they carry is yours. All I will say is this. If you see the red balloon bobbing at Hillcrest, if you see the boy with the broken one in his hand, bring string. And if you write inside the skin, don't write the name that sits in your mouth like a fact. Write the one you keep in the drawer, the one you never say out loud because you're afraid of making it real. Write it like you're tying yourself to the ground. Last year, the balloon had no name. We got lucky. We borrowed one. We gave the weight back. This year, if you drive past and see it tied there, don't laugh. Don't pop it. Don't post it. If you hear a soft knock that sounds like rain learning how to be a hand, put your palm flat against the door and feel for the cold on the other side. If it's there, don't open up. Wait. Sometimes the air holds even when you say it. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the rope is enough. I don't know which it'll be this time, and I'm not going to pretend I do. I only know the hill will keep looking, and the gate will keep remembering how to be open, and somewhere in the oldest part of the cemetery, where the records got wet and the ink learned to swim, a boy with a patched balloon will keep borrowing a face. He will lift the string and ask you, in a voice that sounds like a radio just on the edge of a station, if you have anything that could help him tie a knot. You will. You always do. I'm not a superstitious person. I'm the kind of guy who checks the smoke detector batteries and keeps a flashlight in the junk drawer, who thinks most creepy stories are just bored people scaring each other for the adrenaline. If you're like that too, I get it. I'm not asking you to believe me because I say so. I'm writing this because I have to put it somewhere that isn't just my head. If you read it and decide I'm sleep-deprived or dramatic or lying, fine. But if you live anywhere near Willow Ridge, or honestly near any old cemetery with a little cast-iron gate and a maintenance shed that looks older than the town, don't follow a green lantern at night. I don't care how curious you are, don't. This started last fall. October, obviously. I had just moved back to Willow Ridge after my dad had a minor stroke. He's okay now before anyone asks, but he wasn't supposed to shovel snow or go up and down ladders, which meant I needed a job close enough to check on him. There aren't a lot of jobs in my town that you can just walk into, no experience needed. But municipal maintenance is one of them. Parks, roadside cleanup, the cemetery. I got hired on a Monday. Orientation was Tuesday. On Wednesday, my supervisor, Rick, handed me a ring of keys and said, "You're on the evening shift at Ridgeview." Ridgeview Cemetery sits up on a hill behind the high school. It's not huge, not one of those sprawling famous ones, but it's old. The oldest markers are so thin they flex if you press a finger on them. There's a little chapel that no one uses anymore. A caretaker's shed with wood the color of dried blood and a loop road that crunches under your boots no matter the season. At the back of the cemetery, beyond the farthest row of stones, the hill drops into a stand of pines that swallow sound. When the wind hits them the right way, it sounds like someone whispering in the rows behind you. My first week was boring, in the way you hope cemetery work is boring. Leaf blowers, trash pickup, checking the fence for gaps where kids cut through. Most evenings it was just me and Maya, who'd worked there all summer and had decided she liked the piece. She was one of those people who looks like they glow even in bad lighting. Big coat, chin-length hair, 2 nose rings, and a smile that made old ladies try to set her up with their grandsons. We joked around a lot, sent each other videos of foxes trotting along the fence line, made fun of Rick's habit of calling any tool by the wrong name. "Hand me the ground scissors," he said once, and meant loppers. We didn't talk about the lantern right away. I heard about it from a kid at the gas station. He saw my Ridgeview hoodie pointed with the jerky confidence of a teenager and said, "You seen the dead guy yet?" I laughed. He didn't. The groundskeeper. He never talks. He walks with a weird limp. He has this lantern, it's green. My cousin followed it once and he threw up in the car for 2 days. His friend snickered, but he kept staring at me, reading my face for how scared I was planning to be. I shrugged it off, went home, and told my dad about it while I made him grilled cheese. He nodded like I'd told him they were planning to put in a new stop sign. "Keeper's lantern," he said. "Old story. I heard it when I was your age. It shows up when someone ought to leave well enough alone. Don't follow it." I didn't plan to follow it. I didn't even plan to see it. But apparently plans aren't part of this. The first time I saw the light, it was a Thursday dusk, that gray-blue time when the sky looks like the inside of a seashell. It had rained earlier, so the smell was damp earth and wet stone. Maya and I were picking up the last of the twigs by the old chapel. I bent to grab a beer can from under a yew, and when I straightened, she was frozen, mouth slightly open, looking past me. "There," she whispered. At first I thought it was someone's phone flashlight. It was small and round and farther back than where the grave stopped, bobbing between the tree trunks. But the light wasn't white. It was a weird green, like the glow-in-the-dark paint on my bedroom ceiling when I was a kid. It didn't shine on anything. It was like a coin of color floating in the air. We watched it move laterally along the back fence, slow and steady. It turned toward us, like it had noticed we were watching. Then it held still. "Teenagers with a vape," I said, because it's amazing how quickly your brain coughs up a stupid explanation if it keeps you from being afraid. But nobody's vape light is that green, and the way it hung there with purpose made my mouth dry. Maya didn't say anything for a long moment. When she did, her voice sounded like it was coming through a wall. "Rick said if you see it, you go home." "What, on the clock?" "Yep." She didn't take her eyes off the light. "He said, you see it, you go. I'll sign your timesheet for a full shift." "Are you serious?" "I thought he was messing with me," she said. But he wasn't. The light drifted a little closer through the brush line and I thought I could see a shape behind it. Tall. Hat. I felt stupid thinking hat, like, what, a Civil War cap? A brim? But my brain stuck on it. Hat, shoulders, arm, and something that swung in time with the light, like the way your opposite arm moves when you walk. It stopped again. My scalp prickled so hard it was almost pain. Maya grabbed my sleeve. "Please," she said, and that was the thing that broke me out of my stubbornness. Maya never said please like that. We left the leaf bags where they were and we left. It would have been easy to turn that into a joke. The next morning I tried. "So we saw the haunted vape god," I told Rick, moving my hands like I was worshipping. He didn't laugh. "Go home next time," he said. "I mean it." "But what is it?" I asked. "Like for real?" He looked at me like the question was a trap. "It's not our business," he said finally. "We mow, we trim, we pack up the flowers that blow loose. If someone wants to walk the property after dark with a lantern from the gift shop, that's their decision." "Gift shop?" He shook his head, mouth tight. "Figure of speech, go pull the weeds around the sprinkler heads." Over the next 2 weeks, weird little things started to stack up in a way that I need you to understand was not dramatic while it was happening. This was not doors slamming and blood messages on the wall. It was more like a persistent pest. A drip you can't find. A loose tooth. On Monday, a brass vase by one of the newer graves kept moving to the edge of the grass, like someone was nudging it with a boot and forgetting to fix it. On Tuesday, an empty lawn chair appeared behind the chapel, facing the woods. On Wednesday, I found 3 different grave markers with fresh dirt in front of them, like a narrow rectangle had been dug and refilled. Not the big disturbed ground. Of a recent burial, just a slit, like someone lifted a plank and set it back down. When I mentioned the dirt to Rick, he gave me a look that made me feel 8. "Probably settling," he said. "Happens after rain. Don't touch it." He made coffee in the shed like always, and didn't say another word about it. I told Maya anyway because I had to tell someone. She listened, chewing on her hoodie sleeve, eyes narrowed like she was looking at a puzzle that might be missing pieces. "You know that old story?" she said. "My grandma told me a version once. She said the keeper's job wasn't mowing, it was counting. He has to count the living and the dead and make sure they add up. If they don't, I don't know, fixes it." "How?" I asked, not sure if I wanted to know. "By making the numbers match," she said. "One way or another. That sounds like something a grandma tells a kid to make them come home before dark." "Sure," she said, "but I still came home before dark." The second time I saw the lantern, I was alone. It was a Sunday because the high school marching band was practicing on the field next door, and those kids don't shut up on Sundays. I could hear them clattering through 7 Nation Army, like they were building a barn out of trumpets. The light wasn't at the back fence this time. It was in the aisle between 2 rows, only 10-15 yards away. My first thought was that someone had left a portable light stuck in the ground. But the light moved. It swayed, the way a lantern on a hook sways if someone sets it down hard. I stood there like an idiot, trimmer idling at my knee, inhaling gas fumes. The face behind the light, if that's what it was, never resolved itself beyond, there is the idea of a person. Like when you're looking at a cardboard cutout at a distance and your brain says human, even though your eyes know it isn't. I watched for too long. The band changed to a new song. A breeze came down off the hill. And then I realized something cold. The light wasn't illuminating anything. No shine on the stone next to it, no glow on the grass, just green in the air. I killed the trimmer. The silence made the band sound farther away. My own breath was loud. "Okay," I said, feeling stupid. "You win." I backed up. It didn't follow. I turned, walked fast to the shed, and didn't come out again until Maya pulled up in the truck. "Don't do that," she said when I told her. "Don't look at it that long." I asked why. She shook her head. "Feels like that's what it wants." What does a light want? What does anything want besides an outlet? The third time we saw it, it was different. It was closer. Not just in space. Closer in the way something is when it says your name. We were working late because a storm had blown half the town's trees sideways, and we were behind on cleanup everywhere. The sun went down while we were still out by the chapel, tossing branches into the chipper. 1 minute it was just the 2 of us under the blue dark sky. The next, the light was already there, 3 rows up, bobbing, like we had talked long enough and it was tired of waiting its turn. Maya's gloved hand clamped on my forearm so hard my fingers tingled. "We go," she said. "Now." "Yeah," I said, but I didn't move. It was talking to something old in me. The way the ocean talks to part of you even if you've never swum in it. My stupid brain, with its stupid need to solve a shape in the dark, leaned forward. The light dipped, rose, dipped like a nod. And then I saw it. A marker just beyond the glow. It was newer granite, the polished kind that looks like wet slate. The green shimmer did this weird thing on the face of it, like static on a TV, so I couldn't read the name from where I stood. But there was something under the green that made my jaw lock, the sense of letters. The angle of lines I knew too well. I took a step. Maya made a noise I've only ever heard from animals. I took another step. And the tiny part of me not hypnotized by the light noticed the ground wasn't right. That same narrow rectangle in front of the stone. The dirt a different color, a little higher than the grass on either side. A slot for a door that hadn't been opened yet. "Don't," Maya said, voice shredded. "I did what you do when you tell yourself you're proving something to yourself." I went to my knees and brushed the loose dirt off the base of the stone. My gloves left streaks. The green light made it all look underwater. I squinted and read the name. It was mine. Not in that cheesy same last name as someone else way. My full name, first and middle included. My birth and nothing. No death date. Just a polished hyphen waiting for a number. It was like the world above and below swapped places. My hearing did that hollow, pierced feeling you get on planes. My heartbeat moved into my tongue. I didn't scream. I didn't even stand. I just stared at the carved letters like if I watched long enough, they'd rearrange themselves into something reasonable. A prank, a coincidence. Someone's sick idea of Halloween. Maya had to pull me. She hauled me up by both wrists and we stumbled backwards. The light didn't move. It hung there like a traffic signal saying nothing. When we were 15 steps away, the faint shape behind the light lifted its free hand. I think it tipped its hat. That sounds ridiculous typed out, but that's what my eyes told me. A hat tip, old-fashioned, like we'd reached some shared understanding. The light went dark. Not a fade. Off like a switch. We didn't tell Rick. We didn't tell anyone for 2 days. I couldn't decide what the grown-up thing to do was. Call the police? Tell them what? There's a headstone with my name on it, and I'm scared I'm going to fall into the ground like a bad magician. I didn't know if that made it more real or less. On the second night after we saw it, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the spring of turf under my knees and the grit of granite under my fingertips. Around midnight, the landline rang, the one I kept hooked up for storms. I stared at it ringing, thinking of my dad down the hall in his heart and how bad news usually waits until you're defenseless. When I finally picked up, no one spoke, but I heard something. A layered whisper like wind in pines or 50 people far away all talking at once. I hung up. The phone didn't ring again. I went to the kitchen and ate a slice of white bread standing up, chewing and not tasting it, feeling like I had to put something weighty in my body so I wouldn't float away. The next day, I parked outside the cemetery 30 minutes early and sat there, engine off, watching the gate. Maya pulled in beside me and didn't get out at first. When she did, she walked straight to my door and leaned on the open window. I went back this morning, she said. What? In daylight, she swallowed. There's a stone where we saw it. It's not your name. It's nobody's name. The face is blank. I got out like the seat was suddenly hot. You're sure? I'm sure. We went in together. The dew made our shoe prints dark, easy to follow. We walked to the spot I could have found in my sleep. The marker was there, the kind you buy now, granite with flecks that look like frost. But the face was smooth. No letters, no dates, just a slight shallow scratch where my glove had dragged. My gloved hand. Not my imagination, a mark in the world where I had touched it. Maybe we saw it wrong, I said, sounding like a person practicing lines. Maybe the light made the stone look like it had letters. Maya crouched, elbows balanced on her knees. She rubbed the scratch with her thumb, as if she could smudge the whole thing into a smarter reality. We saw it, she said. We both saw it, but it woke up as something else. We stood there longer than we should have. The wind gusted once, twice, tugging at my work jacket like a child. When the chill finally sank through my denial and into my bones, I got angry. It's funny how anger sometimes shows up like a rescue boat, even if the captain's drunk. I marched down the slope to the shed. Rick looked surprised to see us before our shift. He put down his sandwich. Who authorized overtime? He said. Then he saw my face and his went careful. What happened? There's a stone with my name on it, I said. There was. Now it's not. But I touched it. And the light, Maya squeezed my arm, not to stop me, to show me she was there. Rick closed his eyes like a man deciding what story to tell. He took a breath. Come inside, he said. The shed smelled like old coffee and gasoline and the mold that grows on things that should have been thrown away. Rick pulled a metal folding chair from against the wall and sat on the edge of it, elbows on knees. It was weird, his heavy, loud body language gone. He looked like a kid bracing for a scolding. When I started here, he said, I thought all the stories were, but the first winter, the plow guy buddy of mine hit something that wasn't supposed to be in the road, spun out, got out of the truck to check. There wasn't anything there, but he came back to the shed as white as the snow, saying he saw a light and a man with a hat. Next week, his dad died. That's just a thing that happened. People die. He said it with the false shrug of somebody trying to empty a glass by tipping it a millimeter at a time. But he said the light was leading him. And after that, I noticed things. Dirt where it shouldn't be. Flowers left in the wrong place. And sometimes a stone would be different. Not really changed, but like it had been thinking about it. Thinking about what? I asked. If it should keep a name, he said. Or if it should wait. Wait for what? Maya asked quietly. Rick looked at the floor. He chose his words like stepping stones. For the person to belong to it. I wanted to laugh again and couldn't find the part of me that knew how. Okay, I said, because sometimes the only way forward is through. What do we do? He looked up, met my eyes in a way he didn't usually. You don't follow the light. That's it? You go home. You lock your doors. You keep your head down. If you hear it outside, you don't go to the window. If I hear what? He held my gaze another beat. The lantern, he said. And I understood he didn't mean the glass and metal. He meant whatever sound the light makes when it wants your attention. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every car that went by sounded like footsteps. At 3 a.m., the neighborhood cat that screams when it fights screamed, and I almost went to the window automatically. I stopped myself with my hands flat on the wall like I could hold the house up by pressing. I stood like that so long my palms went numb. The next morning, there was a voicemail on my phone. No missed call, just a message. It was 2 minutes and 13 seconds of walking. Someone walking over gravel with a faint tink. Tink, tink, like a metal hook tapping against glass in time with the steps. I deleted it without listening a second time, then emptied my deleted messages like that would help. I could have quit. I realize now that would have been the sane move. But money is money, and my dad's roof leaks when the snow piles up, and leaving felt like giving the light exactly what it wanted. That night at dinner, my dad looked at me over his mug of tea and said, "You look like you saw a ghost." He meant it as a joke. I changed the subject to the high school's losing football streak and kept my hands from shaking by clenching my thighs under the table. A week went by with nothing. I convinced myself the whole thing was a weird minus sign in my brain that would eventually even out. We had an actual funeral on Friday. Small, quiet, the kind where old men take off their caps and stare at the ground because they can't look at each other yet. I kept to the edges, letting the family have the space, cleaning up after with that sense of doing something that looks like helping. The pastor nodded at me like we were both part of a machine that needed to run smoothly. The machine ran. The sun came out. The air bit my nose the way it starts to in November. See, I told myself in the truck. Life continues. That night, my front porch light flickered. Not the bulb-dying flicker, a steady pulse, almost rhythmic. I stepped into the hallway and a green glow, faint, breathed under the door like the sea. If you're reading this and thinking, call 911, I did. I did call. I walked to the kitchen, dialed, and told the operator there was someone outside my house with a light. She kept me on until the squad car turned down our street. When the officer knocked, the glow vanished like someone snuffed it with 2 fingers. He checked the porch, the yard, around back. No footprints in the frost. No melted places in the grass. He was kind to me in that careful way people are kind when they can tell you aren't telling them everything. If you see it again, he said, call. Don't go outside. I signed the incident slip with a pen that said Willow Ridge Rotary on the side and nodded like I was absorbing useful information. The next day at work, Maya looked wrung out. Her eyes had that glassy, floaty look. It came to my apartment last night, she said quietly, like we were sharing answers on a test and someone might overhear. In the alley. I live over the pizza place. I could see the glow through the grates in the fire escape. It didn't move away until I turned on every light I own. We lasted another day before the climax, if that's what you want to call it. It was a Saturday. The town had a craft fair in the school gym, and people parked along the cemetery road because small towns love to put unrelated things next to each other. Maya and I were working the afternoon because at fairs, folks dump their coffee cups in the nearest bin, which is ours. The sky was a flat sheet. The air had that metallic smell that means the first real cold's coming. Rick left early to check a thing at the South Park. He said it just like that. A thing. He told us to call him if any cars blocked the loop. We nodded, he left. The moment his truck's engine faded, the world went a half shade darker. And then the light was in the chapel doorway. I don't know how to describe how wrong it looked inside that doorway. The chapel's wood is old, almost black, and the light was that incandescent green coin. It should have reflected somewhere, on the door jamb, on the glass of the little window. But it just hovered step for step as something walked out onto the threshold. The difference now was that I could see more of the outline. Not detail, but enough to know the hat was a hat, broad-brimmed. The coat was long. One hand held the handle above the lantern, and the lantern swung in a perfect little arc, tick-tock, like it knew what a metronome was. It stepped down. The grass didn't bend. The light turned, and so did the idea of a face behind it, toward the back of the cemetery. It paused. I felt it like a pressure change, like when you're underwater and someone opens a door to a deeper pool. The air thinned. My ears popped. I knew the way you know you left the oven on, that it wanted us to follow. Maya grabbed my wrist and dug her nails in. Blood and everything else in me went to the center of my chest. I shook my head, small as if the light could see it and be disappointed. It turned again. It took 3 slow steps toward the back fence and stopped. We stood there like figures in a snow globe. The chapel behind us. The loop road to our left. The pines at our backs, windless. Somewhere a kid laughed, muffled by distance and doors. The light brightened very slightly. It was like a cat patting a dangling shoelace. Come on, Maya whispered. If we ignore it, it'll go away. I don't think that's true, I whispered back. I don't either, she said. But we're doing it anyway. We didn't move. It didn't move. I don't know how long that lasted. The world narrowed to the slip of green and the breath in my throat. The thing behind the light raised its free hand. It did not point. It held its palm outward, almost like a greeting. The lantern swung. Tick, tock, tick, and then it began to walk, not toward the back fence, not out of sight, but parallel to us, along the last occupied row. It walked with that limp the gas station kid had mentioned, a tiny hitch like the ground didn't cooperate under 1 foot. As it passed, it paused at every 3rd or 4th stone. Not everyone, just the ones it chose. It would stop, tilt the light toward the ground, and then move on. The stones it paused at, I knew the names. I didn't know how I knew them, but I did. The way you recognize someone from far away at the grocery store and you're already thinking of their name before your brain has suggested any reason. The Anderson boy from down the street when I was 10. Mrs. Caldwell, my 3rd grade teacher. My dad's friend who worked the night shift at the mill. Some of them had been dead for years. Some were newer. Some weren't dead yet. That thought came into my head fully formed and fully rejected. I wouldn't let it in like a moth beating at a lampshade. Not dead yet. Not theirs yet. The light stopped in front of the blank stone. The one that had been mine for a minute. It turned the lantern, angling the green at the face. The stone stayed blank. The light held steady. Nothing changed. It was like watching someone try a door they know is locked out of habit. After a long moment, it continued down the row. My phone vibrated in my pocket so loud against my thigh it made me jump. Rick, on my way back. Everything good? I stared at the screen, at the back of the thing, at the lantern swinging and swinging. I typed yeah and didn't send it. The light reached the end of the row and stopped. It turned again, facing us from maybe 30 yards away. The hand with the lantern dropped to its side. The other hand lifted, fingers curled like it was holding something small and imaginary. I understood, without wanting to, that it was holding a pencil in the air over a list. It tapped the air once, twice. Then it lowered its hand, tipped the hat to us, and walked into the pines. The green light slid between the dark trunks until it was a coin, then a bead, then nothing. The smell of cold and sap came back like we'd been underwater without realizing. Maya let go of my wrist. Her nails had left crescents. We breathed. The marching band started up a song again, off-key and too loud, like the world stubbornly continuing. When Rick came back, we told him exactly none of it. He checked the loop road, complained about the minivan parked on the grass, and asked us to stack the traffic cones for the night. We did what he asked. We were good employees. I wish I could tell you we did something dramatic after that. Salt lines at our doorways, a priest, a therapist. We did normal things, but normal things felt like a costume I was wearing. The blank stone stayed blank. The chair behind the chapel disappeared. The narrow rectangles of soil appeared and reappeared after rain. Maya stopped walking home after her shifts. I started driving past her place around midnight to make sure her windows were still lit. We waved at each other sometimes from behind glass like astronauts. A month later, my dad's roof started to leak at the seam where the chimney meets the shingles. I climbed up to look, even though the ladder made me nervous now in a way ladders never had. While I was up there, my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. I answered without thinking and held the phone between my shoulder and ear so I could tighten the bracket on the gutter. Silence. Then that same layered whisper sound, like leaves talking or voices recorded too far from the mic. I said into the phone, "I won't." The sound paused like someone considering its next line. And then the call ended. This is where you probably want a cleaner ending. A last scene with a scream and a reveal. A body, a confession, a note found in the pocket of a coat in the maintenance shed. I don't have that for you. I have mornings that taste like metal. I have eyes that catch green where there isn't any. I have a stone that has my glove mark on it even though the stone is blank. I have a supervisor who knows more than he can say, and a friend who keeps her lights on all night for reasons we both pretend are about the season. Yesterday I walked the back row in the daylight slowly, counting in a way that felt stupid and holy at the same time. I don't know what I thought I was doing, checking the math maybe. I stopped at the blank stone. I put my fingers on the scratch. I said my name out loud, just my first one, quietly, to see if anything in the soil pricked up its ears. The wind moved in the pines. I heard the band practicing again, brakes squealing on a bus, someone yelling at a dog to come back. Normal life surrounded me like a clear coat on old paint. And then, without meaning to, I looked up at the tree line and found myself searching for a green coin of light like you would search for a friend in a crowd, with relief already on deck in your chest. It scared me. How much I wanted to see it. It scared me more than anything else has. It felt like standing on the edge of a roof with your toes over and thinking, just for a second, about stepping forward for the thrill of it. I stepped back. I walked away. I locked the shed. I turned in my timesheet and went home and made my dad's soup. Tonight I'm writing this. I can hear cars on the road, a distant siren, the hum of the refrigerator. I keep catching my own reflection in the dark window and jumping. The porch light is steady. The phone hasn't rung. I'm trying to end this in a way that will feel done, but maybe that's not how it works. Maybe some stories stay propped open like doors that swell in the frame when it rains. If you're from around here and you think you know the cemetery I'm talking about, don't go up there at night for a dare. Don't bring someone you want to impress. Don't follow a light because you think finding the truth will make you special. The groundskeeper never speaks. That's what people say. I think that's close to the truth, but not all the way. I think he doesn't need to speak because the names do it for him. I think the numbers have to match. And if you ever see a green glow between the stones and feel your feet moving toward it without your permission, please do something that I learned too late to do. Turn around. Say your name out loud like you're pinning it to your chest. Walk away while you still recognize the feel of your own footprints on the path. If your name is carved on the marker, you'll know too late. But maybe there's a window before that, a tiny one, and maybe you can close it yourself. I don't know if the keeper's lantern burns for me, or if I just brushed up against a draft as it passed. I hear the wind sometimes and my fingers itch to lift, like I'm about to tip my hat back to something patient and old that's standing at the edge of my yard, counting. I keep my hands down. I look at the ceiling and count the little dots in the paint instead, until my eyes blur. I don't believe everything I hear. I believe what I've touched. I believe what has touched me back. And I believe that if the light wants you, it already knows the way to your door. It begins as a low moan, like wind through wet earth. Then you hear it, knocking from below. Old-timers say it's the sound of the ones buried alive by mistake. But sometimes when the knocking stops, you'll find muddy handprints on nearby tombstones, smaller ones, like a child's. I didn't believe any of it the first time I heard the story. You hear a lot when you take the night shift at a cemetery. People assume you're the kind of person who collects whispered things. I'm not. I only took the job because it paid steady and let me keep weird hours. I was 26, recently back in my hometown after a rough year that I won't get into here, and my Uncle Lyle needed someone to help with Hillview Memorial after dark. He'd been groundskeeper there for 3 decades, said he trusted family more than whoever the county would send. The cemetery sits past the last gas station, where the road splits. One way goes to a shuttered quarry. The other winds up to a ridge with a cold little chapel on top. If you stand by the north fence, you can hear traffic from the highway like a faraway ocean. It's not a place for jump scares. It's quiet in a way that makes your own breathing sound louder than it should. The first night I worked alone, Lyle gave me the keys, the map, and a flashlight that looked like it had seen Vietnam. "Don't chase noises," he told me, "and don't dig." That one's not a joke. He had a smoker's voice that always sounded annoyed. "You see somebody in here after 10, call the sheriff. Don't try to be a hero, and if you hear knocking, leave it be." I laughed because it felt like I was supposed to. He didn't laugh back. "I mean it," he said, then clapped my shoulder. "You'll be fine. Just don't go starting trouble with the earth." I made it through that first week without anything stranger than a raccoon climbing the angel statue by Section D. I saw deer once. They froze, then bounded between headstones like brown ghosts. Mostly I walked the paths, checked the locks on the maintenance shed, Shooed teenagers off the low wall at the west entrance. A couple of times I sat in the little office in the chapel, drank coffee, and listened to late-night radio until the DJ's voice turned to a soft hum, and I realized I'd been staring at the same point on the wall for 15 minutes. The second week, Dan started. He was my age, beard that never quite connected, the kind of guy who talked even if no one was answering. He did day shifts, but sometimes we overlapped. He came from landscaping. He had opinions about mowers. He used to joke about bringing his daughter out to meet Grandpa because his father was buried up in Section A under a granite slab with an etched trout on it. I never met his kid. I heard about her a lot. Penny, 7 years old. Liked owls and purple sneakers. He wasn't with her mom anymore, but they were figuring it out. I nodded and pretended that didn't make my chest tighten for reasons that felt too personal. The third person in this story is Sheriff Anita Gray. She's not the sheriff in the way you're picturing. Small town or not, she's sharp. She doesn't roll her eyes at ghost stuff. She doesn't encourage it either. She's the kind of person who touches the brim of her hat when she's saying something that matters. She did that when she came out the first time, after the flowers were torn up. That was a Tuesday night. I remember because the radio guy kept saying 2 for Tuesday like it was a prayer. Someone had pulled the silk carnations out of 5 graves and left them scattered, stems broken as if someone tried to carry too many, and then dropped them all at once. I found footprints in the damp strip of soil along the path. Not bare feet, sneakers, small. Lyle said kids. Sheriff Gray said maybe. She took a look at the fence line. "You hear anything?" she asked me. "Nothing weird," I said, "unless you count the foxes screaming. If you don't know what a fox sounds like at 2 in the morning, it's like hearing a person try to tear a scream through a closed mouth." "No knocking?" She said it dry, like she knew the story and didn't buy it, but I saw her glance at the ground when she said it. "Just wind," I said, and it was true that night. But here's the thing. Once someone says a word like knocking out loud inside a cemetery, your ears go looking for shapes in the silence. The brain wants a hook to hang anxiety on. The first time I heard the sound, really heard it, was a week later. The sky had that pale cloud cover that makes the town's glow crawl over the grass. I was by Section C, near the line of child markers that run along the oak roots like little teeth. Those stones are simple. Lambs carved on some, a few with pinwheels or faded toys tucked behind the base. You can tell which ones still have people who visit, because the toys get replaced and the grass is trimmed tighter than anywhere else. Something tapped under my boot. I froze. Waited to feel a root give or the earth settle. Sometimes the soil caves a little over time and your weight shifts. But it came again, not under my foot now, but a yard ahead. 1, 2. Then a pause, like someone counting in their head. Then 3 in a row, quick, like here, here, here. I told myself it was a mole. I don't know what a mole sounds like, but in that moment I decided it was a mole knocking. I stepped back. In my light I saw the waver of grass and the rim of a marker. A small square, no last name, just a first. Emily, and 2 dates less than a year apart. Something moved across the stone. At first I thought it was a slug. Then I saw the streak was finger-wide and wet, and it left a line of mud like a child had dragged a hand there. The streak stopped at the top edge where the grass met granite. I aimed my light lower, into the thin rectangle of earth that separates stone from soil. It was just dirt and a few roots. No hand, of course not, I left. I'm not proud of that. I didn't run exactly. I walked like someone late to a bus. In the office, I turned on the desk lamp and watched light sit on old paperwork. I told myself to go back out to check for animals, for kids. My hand shook fine enough that the coffee cup rattled on the saucer when I set it down. I texted Dan, "You ever hear tapping out by sea?" He didn't answer. It was past midnight. I put my phone face down and listened. The heater clicked. The fabric of the chair creaked when I finally leaned back. In the morning, I showed Lyle the smear on my boot. He said mud was mud and the grounds were wet. He didn't look me in the eye. When I told him about the tapping, he said, "I told you not to dig." "I didn't," I said. "Good," he said. Dan read the text later and came out to the office after his shift. "You heard it?" he asked like I'd won a radio contest. I heard something. He told me there used to be safety bells back when people worried about premature burial. He'd read about it online. Little pipes run from the coffin to the surface, and bells attached, so if someone woke up down there, Dan, I'm just saying, historically. He shrugged, then smiled like the whole thing was a campfire story. If I die, make sure I get the bell package. I'll tie a cowbell around your ankle, I said, promise? He grinned. It was easy with him to break the tension in the air. He tapped the desk. 1, 2, pause. 3. Don't do that, I said sharper than I meant. The next incident wasn't bells. It was a toy, a little plastic owl, purple and white with big circles for eyes. I found it at the base of one of the older stones in Section A, about 20 feet from Dan's father's marker. I only noticed it because it wasn't faded like most of those toys get. It looked new. Something sticky had dried across its back, and sap maybe, or soda. I picked it up and set it on the stone, thinking maybe a kid had left it and would come back. That afternoon, Dan came in from mowing with his shoulders tight. You put this out there as a joke? He held up the owl. No, I said. Found it by A. That's Penny's, he said. She lost it 2 days ago at her mom's. I just bought that exact one again last week because she cried herself to sleep over it. He looked like he wanted to laugh but didn't know how. How's it in the cemetery? Maybe she brought it here. I said, or her mom did. She hasn't been here since Father's Day, he said quietly and put the owl down face up on the desk. Its eyes were ridiculous and round, like it was surprised to find itself anywhere at all. We returned the owl to Dan's truck. He said he'd give it back at drop-off. The next morning he came in pale. It was on my porch, he said. Last night. After work. I didn't tell Penny yet. I don't know how it got there. I didn't know what to do with that, so I invited Logic to sit in the front row and speak louder than anything else. Maybe she found it and brought it home? He nodded like he wanted to agree. Yeah, maybe. 2 nights after, I was doing the path by Section C again, this time hugging the outer fence where the maples break the wind. It was colder than it had any right to be for September. I walked with the beam low to the ground so I wouldn't blind myself with dew. The tapping started again, faint as if it had been walking beside me, waiting for the right moment. 1, 2. Pause. 3. It moved ahead of me, like something under the earth was pacing me to the oak line. Then it stopped by the little row of stones with lambs carved on top. I made myself stand still. Hello, I said. I felt stupid immediately. From the trees came an answer that wasn't human, the crackle of leaves and that tight sound deer make when they huff. But I also heard something else, almost like a voice dropping into a well where words turn to shapes. If you've ever listened to a sound through a closed door and convinced yourself you know what's being said, it was like that. I thought I heard a no or a low syllable drawn out. And then, this is worse to remember than to write, I heard, or I thought I heard, here. It wasn't loud. I could have been inventing it to match the knock pattern in my head. The wind might have dragged the word through the grass. The mind can be cruel like that. I stood there with my mouth open and forgot how to breathe in an even way for a few seconds. I put the flat of my palm on the ground. The soil was cold. I didn't feel vibration. I didn't feel a heartbeat or anything cinematic. I felt like an idiot kneeling in the dark about to cry. I told myself again not to dig. I thought of Lyle's hand on my shoulder. I moved my hand an inch to the left and touched the rim of a stone. Emily. Someone had put a new pinwheel there. It turned 1 click and stopped. I walked to the chapel and called Sheriff Gray. She came with a deputy and a different kind of flashlight than mine, the heavy kind you could crack a skull with. She asked me to show her where. When we got there, the pinwheel was still. The ground looked exactly like ground. She knelt, gloved, and pressed her ear near the grass like she was listening for a train. After a minute, she stood and looked at me steady. You're not messing with me, right? I wish, I said. I'm not authorizing any disturbance of remains, she said, almost to herself. But I'm also not ignoring a report like this. She touched the brim of her hat. Let me make a call. She called the next morning. They'd checked missing persons reports against burial records, she said. Nothing jumped out. No grave mismatches. No reason to unearth anything. She didn't say the word ghost. She didn't say the word prank. If you see anyone on the grounds at night, call me directly, she said. Don't approach. You hear me? I heard her. For a few days, nothing happened. The radio did its late-night hum. Dan mowed in long straight lines, the kind of lines you'll never notice unless they're bad. I swept the chapel, refilled the condolence book pens, put out fresh batteries in the electric candle rack because some people like to see lights even after lights go out. The foxes screamed one night and I flinched so hard the flashlight hit my chin. I told myself to get a grip. I told myself to be a person who doesn't invent voices in the grass. On Saturday, the church up the road had a funeral. It was small, rainy. I saw the cars from the office window and didn't go out because it wasn't my business. I watched the priest's umbrella tilt and people fold into themselves against weather like it was a private grief. After they left, I went out to make sure the path was clean. I found the first handprints then. Not fresh, dried to a brown outline, on the side of a white marble stone near the new grave. 5 small fingers splayed. A second set, smudged lower down. I touched one with the tip of my finger. It was dirt, simple as that. Hands had been in earth and then on stone. The stone belonged to a woman named Teresa who died in 1999. No children were listed. I looked around like you do when a trick is performed in front of you. No one stood among the stones. A breeze came up from the road. The pinwheels turned a fraction, almost in sync. A crow called once and stopped as if it had changed its mind. I took a picture of the handprints because I needed them to be a real thing that would still be real on a screen. I texted it to Dan and to Sheriff Gray. Dan wrote back, "Yeah, kid. Sheriff, I'm on my way." She walked the grounds with me, measured the prints with a pocket tape measure and said, "Small. Could be a child. Could be small adult hands. Could be a kid hopped the fence after the funeral. You're not going to say raccoon hands," I said. "Raccoons don't stop to admire engraving," she said, then gave me a look. "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "I just didn't sleep great." "You keep hearing things?" she asked. "Not since Tuesday," I said. "It's fine." She nodded like she believed me half and didn't press. She told me to keep a log. Write down dates, times, weather, what I heard, where I was standing. "If there's a pattern, we'll find it," she said. "If there's a person, we'll find them too." I started the log that night. I wrote down the temperature, the phase of the moon because that felt like a thing you should write when you don't know what matters. The smell of cut grass still in the air. I wrote 12:18 a.m., 2 taps near C, then 3. 12:24 distant fox. 1:03 sound like a word, maybe here. I hated how my own handwriting looked like I was making it up. On Monday morning, Dan didn't come in. He was never late. Lyle was short with me until he called Dan's cell and it went straight to voicemail. He dialed again, then the landline at Dan's place. No answer. He frowned in a way I'd never seen. "He's picking up Penny at 8, he said, which was news to me only in that I didn't know the days. Maybe he's running behind. He wasn't. By noon, the sheriff's car was parked by the chapel. By 2, people from town were circling. Not on foot, but slow drives past the gate like the cemetery could explain something. By 3, Anita told us they'd issued a bolo, be on the lookout for Dan's truck. By 5, a deputy found it at the trailhead by the quarry road, empty. The driver's side door locked. The passenger side unlocked. That night I tried to do my rounds like normal and failed. Every shape was a person. Every gap between trees whispered. Somewhere around midnight I realized I was holding my breath again, listening for knocking like it was a lighthouse in fog. When it came finally, I flinched so hard my shoulder cracked. 1, 2. Pause. 3. It was right beside me, so close it felt like it climbed my spine. I said out loud without planning it, "Where?" Then the tapping moved. It led me, and I know how this sounds, it led me. I followed it past the oak line, down to the lowest part of the grounds where the soil stays wet longer. It stopped by a stone I had never paid attention to because it was plain, and sunk a little crooked. No lamb, no etching. Just a name. Unknown child, 1928. I set the flashlight on top of the stone and the beam swung down into the grass. There were 2 small handprints there too, overlapping, like someone had pressed and then pressed again. My stomach dropped. I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was doing something you can't undo. I called the sheriff. I told her exactly where I was. "Don't move," she said. "Do not disturb the ground." "I'm coming." I didn't move. I watched my breath turn to fog. My flashlight hissed, or maybe the battery just shifted, and went out for half a second like a blink. When it came back, the beam caught something pale near the base of the stone. I thought it was a root. I thought it was a scrap of old cloth. It was a string, a thin fraying cord disappearing into a crack of settled soil where the grave had sunk. It looked like it could have been white once. It looked like the kind of string you'd tie to a bell. I didn't touch it. I stood there and tried to think of anything except reaching down. I stood there and listened, and under everything, under the leaves, under the highway hush, under the blood in my ears, I heard something small. Not a voice, not a word. A rhythm. 1, 2. Pause. 3. The sheriff arrived fast. She came with lights low and a steadiness that made my eyes sting. She let out a breath when she saw the string. For a second, just a second, she looked young and scared in a way I couldn't reconcile with the badge. Then she squared up. "We're not excavating tonight," she said, like she was telling herself as much as me. "We'll do this tomorrow properly with the county. No one touches anything." "Dan," I said, and didn't know what I was asking. "We're looking," she said. "We're still looking." They secured the area. They set a small cone out like it was a traffic stop, and not the corner of a child's grave. I sat in the office after and tried to drink water and ended up just holding the cup until my hand warmed it. Lyle came in and sat on the other chair and didn't speak for a while. "Sometimes the earth tries to give something back," he said finally. And I didn't know if that was a warning or a comfort. I didn't sleep when I went home. I live in the basement apartment of my mother's duplex. It's clean and it smells like laundry detergent if someone upstairs is doing a load. I lay on my back and watched the clock blink from 2:59 to 3 hours and told myself I'd dreamt the string. I told myself it was a root. I told myself the knocking was my blood. Somewhere between one thought and the next I must have drifted, because I woke to a sound that was not in my head. A tap. Under me. I sat up so fast the blanket twisted around my legs. I looked at the floor like a cat hearing mice. It came again. 2 taps, pause, 3. The sound wasn't loud. It was like someone lightly knocking on wood 2 rooms away. I put my ear to the laminate and felt stupid and terrified in one piece. I heard the smallest scratch like a nail on the underside of a table. I told myself it was plumbing. Pipes knock. This is a known thing. Houses settle. Also known. The building is old. Water hammers. These are facts. The sound quit. I sat up. I laughed once because the air in my chest had to come out somehow. I got a text right then from an unknown number. No name, just a photo. It was dark and grainy, like the inside of a cave. In the corner you could see a little arc of light. In the foreground, a handprint on what might have been wood. Small. The caption was nothing but 3 dots. I didn't call the sheriff at 3 in the morning. I wish I had. Instead, I spent the next hours telling myself it was a wrong number. A sick prank. One of Dan's friends messing with me because I worked at a cemetery and had told a story to the wrong person. When the sun finally scraped up, I went to Hillview early. The county crew was already there. They had a small backhoe and a restraint about how it was going to be used. Sheriff Gray signed papers and spoke to a woman from the Historical Society, who kept saying context in a worried way. They didn't bring Dan up. No one said his name out loud, but it blew through us anyway. They dug with care. A ring of sod lifted first, set aside like a plate, then layers of dark soil. At about 3 feet, they brought out brushes. Someone found something metal and said, "Old pin, could be nothing." At 5 feet, the backhoe operator stepped away from the controls and rubbed his face like he needed to wipe the expression off. He pointed down and said quietly, "There. You can stop reading now if you want a clean answer. I don't have one for you. I can only tell you what we saw. There was no coffin. Not anymore. Wood doesn't last forever. There was a stain in the shape of a box. Darker earth like old tea. At one corner, a length of pipe, thin like conduit, ran up toward where the headstone would have been decades ago, then turned to powder when they touched it. Alongside that, the frayed edge of a cord, white once, now the color of bone. And there were small bones. Not arranged in a way I want to describe. Not in a way that told a story other than time. You didn't need to be an expert to see that this wasn't a recent grave. It was old. It was what it said on the stone. Unknown child buried in 1928, the end of it. The sheriff stood very still. The woman from the Historical Society cried into her sleeve. Lyle took off his hat. We all breathed shallow and careful, like noise might disturb something gentle. No one rang a bell. There wasn't one to ring. They documented and refilled with the same care they used to remove. The string was lifted, bagged, labeled. The pipe was chalked on the map. The logbook I kept was photocopied. The handprints were scrubbed by rain the next day, and I took that as a mercy. They didn't find Dan that week. Or the week after. They found his phone in a ditch near the quarry road, screen cracked, dead. They found a set of prints that might have been his, might have been someone else's, in the mud by a stand of birch. They found tire tracks they couldn't match exactly. The sheriff came by the office and asked me to go over everything again. I did. She looked at me like she was measuring whether I was a witness or someone with a story problem. She didn't accuse me of anything except withholding sleep and eating properly. The last time I heard the knocking at Hillview was a month later. The leaves had started to go red on the edges, and tourists came for the chapel's historic charm. I was walking the upper path at close to 1 in the morning. The air smelled like damp pennies and wood smoke. 1, 2, pause, 3. It came from the row by Emily again. I stopped and said out loud, "I hear you," because it felt less crazy to narrate it. Then for the first time, the taps changed. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1. It didn't mean anything to me, but it felt like it meant something, and that was worse. I told the sheriff in the morning. She wrote it in a new column in my log where she'd started to chart the patterns like weather. That night, back in my basement apartment with the washer upstairs thudding some normal rhythm, I lay in bed and let sleep come up slow. It almost got me. Then from under the floor there was a knock. 1, then 2, then 3, pause, 1, the same pattern. It sounded like it came from the far wall by the storage closet. I sat up and laughed, that weird single laugh again, because I didn't know how else to exit the moment. I got up and stood by the closet door and pressed my palm to the wall. It was just paint and drywall over whatever the house was built from. No secret passage, no hidden speaker. I put my ear to it. I heard the washer spin down and someone upstairs cough. I could have called someone. I didn't. I sat on the floor back against the wall and waited for another knock. It didn't come. That almost made it worse. 2 days later, Penny came by the cemetery with her mom. I was raking near the entrance when I saw Dan's truck pull up, and then remembered it wasn't Dan in it anymore. His ex got out, tight smile, eyes that had done too much crying. Penny climbed out behind her and stood with that strange carefulness kids get when they think their feet might wake something. She wore purple sneakers. She looked smaller than 7. She went to her grandfather's stone and put down the purple owl. A third one, I guessed. Her mom knelt beside her and said something I didn't catch. As they walked back, Penny stopped by the row with the lambs and looked past me to the oak line like she'd heard her name. Then she looked at me. Kids don't have the social rules we do. They just ask, "What's down there?" she said, pointing to the ground by the stones. "Stories," I said, because what else was I going to say? She nodded like that made sense. She pressed her palm to a stone. Emily, the way a kid presses a hand to a bakery case to see what's inside. When she lifted it away, her small print was so clear in the dust that I couldn't breathe for a second. Her mom said her name, gentle but ready, and she stepped back and took her mom's hand. They left. The pinwheels clicked once in a breeze I didn't feel on my face. A week after that, Sheriff Gray called to say they'd gotten a tip about Dan. A guy at a gas station 20 miles out remembered a man who looked like him getting into a sedan with out-of-state plates. A blurry camera image could have been Dan, or not. Sheriff didn't say it wasn't hopeful. She didn't say it was. "You told me to tell you if there was movement," she said. "This is movement. Sometimes I think about the string, the way it looked in the beam, how easy it would have been to tug, to feel that something on the other end that is no longer there. I think about the shape of a hand in the damp on a stone, and how you can spend your life telling the difference between a story and a signal and never be sure you've got it right. If there's a point to this, it's not that cemeteries are haunted. They are, but not in the obvious ways. They're haunted by schedules and small routines and the way names sit beside dates like simple equations you can't solve. They're haunted by what the living bring with them and what they take away when they go. And sometimes, not often, not enough to make anyone write a policy, the ground talks. Maybe it's water in a pipe. Maybe it's an animal. Maybe it's the old bell cords that nobody pulled in 100 years, fraying and rubbing against their holes. Maybe it's a kid who doesn't know how to stop asking for help, even after asking stopped being useful. I kept the night shift another 2 months. I still have the log. It reads like weather. Clear, no wind, 1, 2, pause, 3. In October, the taps slowed. The earth got harder. I didn't hear the pattern under my apartment again, but sometimes when the washer shudders, I catch that memory, and my heart stumbles like my own body is trying to step around a grave. The owl sits on Dan's father's stone still. People bring new flowers next to it and don't move it, because everyone understands there are certain objects you leave where you find them. Last week a storm knocked the power out. I sat in the chapel office with a battery lantern and listened to rain tick on the stained glass. When the wind eased, there was a sound that wasn't water. It came from the floorboards, faint enough to blame on anything else. 1, 2, pause, 3. Then, after a breath so long I counted to 7 without meaning to, a single tap. Like the end of a sentence, I said out loud, okay. I don't know who I was talking to or what I was agreeing to. It felt like the only thing to say. They haven't found Dan. If you're reading this because you recognize the name or because you drove the quarry road that night and saw a truck and didn't think it mattered, call the sheriff. I don't have a grand theory about where he went or who he went with. I have a cemetery that gets quiet and then less quiet. I have a basement where the pipes speak a language I pretend not to understand. I have dirt under the nails of my left hand that won't completely scrub out. I have sometimes the sound of small hands on stone. If you ever visit Hillview, walk by the oak line at dusk. Do it alone if you can stand it. Stop at the row with the lambs. Don't say anything. Put your palm on the ground, not to test for a pulse. Nothing theatrical. Just to feel the temperature of the earth. If you hear tapping, leave it be. Don't dig. Don't pretend you're a hero. Some things aren't for saving and some aren't meant to be saved by you. But if something says here, pay attention to where you are. Sometimes the only thing we're being asked is to witness. And if later at home you hear a knock come up through your floor, 1, 2, pause, 3. And then after a while one more, soft as a fingertip on wood, don't answer. Don't say who's there. Sit with it. Let the sound be what it is. Proof that the ground remembers the shape of us long after we're gone, and sometimes, for reasons I don't pretend to know, it remembers the small ones most of all. I'm not superstitious. I fix office printers for a living and live alone with a second-hand cat that ignores me. Most of my nights end with a microwaved burrito and an algorithm recommending videos about home repair or people walking through abandoned mansions. If you're expecting this to be cinematic, lightning splitting the sky, a violin sting, I'm sorry. Everything about what happened to me was slow and quiet and boring until it wasn't. It started with a rental that looked fine on paper. The house was a one-bedroom on the edge of town, a square box with beige carpet and a kitchen that tried very hard to be open concept. What the listing didn't mention, and what I didn't notice until the U-Haul was already unpacked, was the cemetery at the end of the block. A line of crumbling stone markers hid behind a row of crabapple trees, and if I stood in my driveway and squinted, I could read the dates on the nearest headstones. 1900s mostly. Nothing like the Gothic cemeteries with angels and mausoleums you see online. This one was plain. Grass, stones, a few benches. It didn't bother me. My landlord, a woman named Lena with a heavy key ring and a smile that seemed threaded on, pointed to the crabapple trees and said, "They keep it tidy. The grounds guy is named Ben. You'll hardly notice it. I hardly noticed it for a week. I work odd hours, on call all day and sometimes all night if a business's network goes down. I adopted a rhythm. Fix printers, rewire routers, get paid in stale donuts. At 11 p.m., I'd be answering emails with the window cracked open, the night air carrying that sweet, wet smell of the trees. The first time I heard her was a Wednesday. I'd left my laptop on the coffee table and went to fill a glass of water. I remember the digital clock on the stove flipping from 11:59 to 12:00 as the ice machine rattled. The cry was soft, so soft I thought it was the wind snagging on an eave. Then it came again, a sound like someone trying not to sob and failing. I looked at the open window. The curtain breathed in and out. There were cars on the highway a few blocks over, a train somewhere far away. I turned off the faucet and stood still. The cry wasn't in the house. It was outside, down the block, close to those crabapple trees. I told myself it was an animal. A fox can sound like a person in pain. I took my phone with me and went to the door. The porch light made a yellow island on the walkway. Beyond it, the street fell into that dark that isn't black, just empty of detail. The crying stopped. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, feeling foolish, feeling like a neighbor who's only been around for 6 days has no right to get involved. Then the crying started again, and this time it was accompanied by a voice. A woman's hoarse with grief saying, "Please, have you seen my husband?" I didn't want to call out into the night. It felt like I would be inviting something in, I went back to the couch, shut the window, and tried to laugh at myself. I even typed "fox crying at night" into YouTube. I dozed off on the couch with a video of a park ranger explaining coyote yips. In the morning, I told Lena when I dropped off the first rent check. Her office is a room attached to her garage, the walls hung with keys and maintenance schedules. When I mentioned the cemetery, her smile tightened. "Teens," she said. "They hang out there. If they bother you, call Ben. He does security rounds." "After midnight?" "Sometimes," she said, which is not really an answer. On Thursday, I stayed up on purpose. I propped my eyelids open with cheap coffee and those gummy peach rings that turn your tongue into sandpaper. At 12:01 a.m., the crying started. It was closer, I thought. I muted my laptop. My phone was recording because that seemed sensible. The voice followed. "Have you seen my husband?" Rising and falling like she was walking, like my house was a shoreline she was pacing along. I walked to the door. When I opened it, cold air slid in. Something about the temperature struck me. It was October, yes, but the air had that basement chill. The wet breath a room gets when you've been mopping. The street was empty. No pedestrians, no cars, just the rectangle of my porch light soaking into the dark. The crying went quiet. I took 2 steps out. "Hello?" I called. Silence the way a classroom is silent when someone asks a trick question. I felt the porch boards under my slippers, the paint peeling into little chips that stuck to the fabric. I turned to go back inside and stopped. Down the block, at the line of crab apples, a shape separated itself from the deeper shadow. It was the suggestion of a person, not a cutout, not a sheet, just the impression of cloth that moves even when there's no wind. "Hello?" I said again, softer. The shape didn't come closer. It moved, slow, and even at that distance I saw the way it bent at the neck. It looked like someone weeping into their hands. My phone buzzed in my pocket with the timer I'd set to make sure I didn't miss an early meeting. The sound broke the spell. I went inside, locked the door, and told myself I'd imagined it. I forgot about the recording until the next afternoon. I played it while making a sandwich. It captured the air moving through the mic, the hum of my refrigerator, and faintly a woman saying, "Have you seen my husband?" It was there. It was not the wind. I sent the clip to my friend Mark, everyone calls him Mo, who works nights at the municipal water treatment plant and has an endless supply of skeptics' patients. "Coyote," he texted back. Or some TikTok of a coyote. "Coyotes don't ask after their husbands," I wrote. "Tell that to my ex," he replied, which is very Mo. The next night, I stuck to my couch again. I told myself I would not go outside. At 12:03 a.m., the crying came in like a tide. This time, the voice was so near it felt like it was right under my window. A hoarse whisper threaded with mud and cold, "Please, have you seen my husband?" Before I could decide if I was going to answer, someone else did. Another voice, male, closer to the street. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I shot to the door so fast I nearly tripped. On the sidewalk was Ben, the groundskeeper, in a reflective vest with a set of keys that could steal the moon. He had the cautious posture of a person who's dealt with drunks and dogs. "Ma'am," he repeated into the dark. Then to me, "You hear that?" I nodded. She was crying. I thought. He tilted his head toward the cemetery. "Midnights bring out stories," he said, and at the edge of his matter-of-fact tone I heard something else. He was afraid of looking afraid. We walked down the sidewalk together. He aimed a flashlight beam at the crabapple trees. Shadows jumped like fish. The beam slid over grass, the low hedge, the stones silvered with dew. No one there. The crying went still. "She's there some nights," he said softly. "Always midnight. Always the same question. We've had complaints. Folks come by with EMF meters and the like. Most give up by the third foggy night. Have you talked to her?" I asked. He glanced at me. "If you approach, she asks if you've seen her husband," he said. "And if you say yes, she'll grab your wrist. Cold as a freezer. Then she smiles. Mouthful of dirt. That's graphic," I said, trying to laugh. He didn't. "If you say no, she vanishes, leaves muddy footprints to your door." "You're messing with me," I said. He lifted the beam and looked at me. "Do I look like I'm in a joking mood?" "I call Lena when I get it. She says ignore it so long as nobody's trespassing. Cops hate coming out because by the time they do, there's nothing there and she's left. Reminders." He did not explain what reminders meant. I slept badly. Every sound the house made was magnified. The water heater's thump a footstep, the fridge's compressor a breath. At 3 a.m., I dozed off and dreamed of my mother calling my name down a long hallway and turned on all the lights on my way to the bathroom because I am a grown adult. Saturday morning, the porch mat was damp. That would be normal after a night of dew, except for the tracks. They were not shoe prints. They were not pretty either, just ovals and smears. As if someone had walked up from the direction of the cemetery in bare feet, soles caked with mud, and stopped at my door. I stood with my hand on the doorknob looking at the last print pressed into the mat, as crisp as if it had been cut there, toes splayed, a little curve at the side where a pinky toe might be. I took a photo. I took another, because the first one felt like it might erase itself. I did not call the police. What would I say? There were muddy prints? A sad woman asked me a question? I texted Mo. He called immediately. Don't follow them, he said before hello. I'm coming over after shift. It's daytime, I said. Ghosts do brunch, he said. I've seen BuzzFeed Unsolved. When he arrived, his steel-toed work boots clanged on the steps. He crouched and put a finger next to the last print but didn't touch it. The mud was drying into a crust the color of coffee grounds. We followed the prints back down the walk. They faded on the sidewalk, then reappeared in the grass at the curb, then again on the graveyard path. They went 3 stones in, toward a row with the older markers, and disappeared at a bench inscribed with a list of family names. I read the nearest stone. It just said Elkins with dates and a beloved husband and father line. Mo squinted at the bench. Maybe someone playing a joke, he said. Or someone camping out. The prince went to my door, I said. He blew out a breath through his cheeks. A woman with a stroller rolled by and gave us the neighbor half-smile people give when they want to be polite but not involved. She said, "Morning," and moved on. I spent Saturday afternoon Googling the cemetery. It was called Ridgeview. Established in 1902 after a flood wiped out the older graveyard by the river. There were a few local newspaper clippings, Eagle Scouts cleaning stones, a veterans group replacing flags. One article from the 1970s mentioned a rash of vandalism and a woman in black, scaring teenagers away by making a nuisance of herself. The tone of the piece was amused. I guess ghosts were funny in the 70s. That night I moved the couch so I could see down the hall to my front door. I told myself I wouldn't answer it if someone knocked. I told myself I would just observe. At 11:58, the refrigerator turned on. At 11:59, my phone rolled from one side of the coffee table to the other on its own weight, vibrating with some spam text. At 12:00, she started crying. It came from the right this time, like she was starting near the alley and making her way along the hedge. I sat up with my hands between my knees. She cried for a full minute. A sound that exposes the soft part of you that still remembers being little and wanting someone to fix the hurt. Then close to my window she said, "Please, have you seen my husband?" I don't know why I answered. Maybe she sounded more human than she had any right to. Maybe I wanted to prove Ben's story wrong. I said out loud, "No." The crying stopped mid-breath. The sudden quiet filled the room like water poured in a bowl. I held the breath I'd been taking, afraid to let it out. Then from the sidewalk, a single wet step, another, a third. My porch boards creaked. I saw the shadow of someone on the glass of my door. It shifted once like a bird leaning its head, and then it was gone. The air lightened. The refrigerator's hum sounded sheepish. I sat for a long time and then stood and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. In the morning, the prints were there again. They started at the curb this time and moved with more certainty. The last one was not on the mat but against the door itself, a smear as if a palm had been pressed there and slid. I didn't tell Lena. I didn't want to be the crazy tenant. I didn't call Ben. I went to work and listened to a man explain to me with great sincerity how a wireless mouse works. I said yes and and sent an invoice and tried not to think about the fact that I had answered a question and been rewarded with evidence that someone or something knew exactly where I lived. Monday. Mo showed up with coffee and a plan. He had the kind of plan that belongs to people who have watched too many true crime channels. Motion-activated camera on the porch, baby powder lightly dusted across the mat to capture prints, a bell hung on fish line across the porch steps so we'd hear someone approach. He was giddy in a way that made me nervous. "I'm doing this for my own entertainment," he admitted. "And for my sanity," I said. We set up the camera and the bell, and I dusted the mat with baby powder that smelled like, well, babies. which is a smell that doesn't belong in the same sentence as cemetery. He drew a chalk line across the top step like he was setting a tripwire. Then he left to catch up on sleep before his shift. I sat on the couch with the lights low in the hallway in my peripheral vision like a nervous animal. At midnight, the crying came, and something else came with it. A smell like the inside of a damp cardboard box that's been left in a garage for a year. Old wet, the voice, please. Have you seen my husband? Drifted almost lazily this time. I stayed quiet. I didn't know what would count as an answer if she couldn't hear me. I thought of an absurd rule. Maybe it only worked face to face. But then I remembered Ben saying people approached her. I did not intend to. She asked again, the same cadence, the same timings between words like water dripping from a faucet. When I didn't answer, the crying dwindled and went away. The air warmed. No bell rang. No camera light flicked. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. At 12:17, when the room felt normal again, the bell rang. Once. A bright sound in the dark. I froze. It rang again, slower, as if a child was pulling at the line with a curious finger. I stood and moved down the hall. The house had shrunk to its essential parts: door, lock, chain, peephole. I looked through the peephole and saw the porch lit like a stage. No one there. The bell hung still. I cracked the door on the chain and slid my hand through to touch the bell. It swung easily. I let it fall. Then something cold slid around my wrist. I jerked back so hard I hit the doorframe with my shoulder. The chain held. My breath went too fast and the door rattled in its jam. I shut it and put my back to it and waited for the pounding that didn't come. I didn't scream. I've rehearsed that moment 100 times since, and I don't think I could have screamed. Not even if someone had asked me to. Fear bent the sound out of me and left me flat. When I could move, I turned the deadbolt in the chain, pulled the door open and shone my phone's flashlight onto the porch. The mat was smeared with baby powder, white and soft except where something had pressed into it. The prints were there, bare, thin, toes spread, front a foot heavy. And next to them, on the inside rim of the door like a signature, 4 tiny lines of dirt tracing where fingers had slid. I woke Mo with a call. He answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick. "I'm coming," he said without asking what. When he arrived, I showed him the camera footage. It was nothing. The minutes around midnight were full of the light the camera uses to fix exposure in the dark, so everything near glowed more than it should. The porch was empty. At 12:17, the bell jumped. The camera wobbled for no reason I could see. The sensor registered movement. There were no feet. "I don't like that," Mo said, and then quieter. "Are you okay?" "I don't want to live here anymore," I said, and winning a sprinting contest against a sob. But my lease hates that idea. He made me eat toast. He stayed until the sun was above the crab apples, which made them look naive. Small, tidy trees pretending to be fierce. At noon, I walked to the cemetery to find Ben. He wasn't hard to find. He was trimming around a row of stones, headphones on, one hand moving like a metronome. I waited until he noticed me. He took off the headphones and squinted up. "She grabbed me," I said. His face changed in a slow way. "You say yes?" I said no earlier, and nothing happened then. He nodded once, like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "It isn't only yes," he said. "If you open the door and you're thinking about letting her in, sometimes that's enough. She doesn't speak English the way we do. She hears something older than words." "I wasn't thinking about letting her in," I said reflexively, because pride is stubborn. And then I remembered my hand reaching through the door to touch the bell. My mother's voice in my dream calling me down a long hallway. He wiped the blade of the trimmer on a rag. "People like rules," he said. "Say yes and she does this, say no and she does that." But we made the rules after the fact. We're trying to work backward from the mess. "Who is she?" I asked. Ben hesitated. When he spoke, he kept his eyes on the stones. "Some say she's from the flood. They were moving graves up from the river to here in 1902. The ground was soft. Coffins break. Names get lost. Maybe a husband got left behind or mixed up. Maybe a wife came to find him and couldn't. Grief makes people stubborn. The story felt like a sweater I could pull around myself even if it was full of holes." "Have you seen her?" I asked. He blew out a breath. "Twice. The first time she asked me if I'd seen him and I said yes because I didn't want to tell a grieving woman no even if she wasn't." He stopped. made a shape with his hand like he'd dropped a thought and couldn't find it. She took my wrist. You ever reach into a lake in spring and touch the mud? That, she smiled like she was proud of herself. Mouth was dirty. Not blood, dirt. The second time I said no. She vanished. That night I found damp tracks from the office door to my truck. Next morning, mud on the seat like someone had sat there in a wet dress. I cleaned the truck and I don't park by the office anymore. What does she want? I asked, knowing he would only have guesses and wanting them anyway. Something to do with doors, he said finally. People say she can't cross your threshold unless you let her, but thresholds aren't just houses. There are other kinds. He looked tired. I left him to his work. That afternoon, I scrubbed the door with a brush until the mud lifted and the wood pinked. I threw out the powdery mat and bought a rubber one from the hardware store that said "Welcome" in cheerful letters, because I am sometimes stupid. I told myself I would be elsewhere at midnight. I packed a bag and drove to Mo's apartment across town. He didn't mock me. He played a dumb game on his TV where you are a farmer and time moves too fast. We fell asleep with the TV whispering something about turnips. At 12:06 a.m., his upstairs neighbor's dog started barking. At 12:07 a.m., someone knocked on Mo's door. Not loud, not frantic. 3 steady knocks, polite as a sales call. We both sat up. He muted the TV. The dog barked again, lower this time. We looked at each other and I shook my head. He whispered, "Sometimes people really do need help," which was such an ordinary and decent thing to say that I was ashamed of my fear for a second. He got up and went to the door and I followed him. Because this is how horror movies start, and I am the person screaming at the screen that you should never split up. He looked through the peephole and froze. He lifted his hand, dropped it, then lifted it again and mouthed, "No one." The knock came again. Mo held up his fingers, 3, 2, 1, then flipped the deadbolt and cracked the door. I was expecting a rush of cold, but the air was just apartment air, warm and stale, carrying the smell of someone's dinner. The hallway was quiet. No one there. He opened the door all the way, his forearm tense. Down the hall, Mrs. Carter's TVs had left 2 blue squares on the ceiling. The dog upstairs stopped barking mid-woof like someone had turned off a switch. We stood there like idiots for a count of 20 and then shut the door. "Maybe kids," Mo said, and his voice did not believe him. We sat on the couch again and he turned the volume up like volume can push fear out of a room. I watched the door until the end of the episode, and when the TV told us this game day had been successful, I laughed too loud. In the morning, when we opened the door to go get breakfast, there were damp half-moon prints on the hallway carpet. They were not quite human-sized, a little thin, the toes longer than they should have been. They faced the door. They did not lead away. I moved back to my house because where else was I going to go? I thought of telling Lena, but I imagined her practical look, the one she saves for tenants who call about ants, and kept quiet. I went to the hardware store again and bought a second lock. The kid who cut keys for me was new and enthusiastic and told me stories about customers who locked themselves in their bathrooms. I laughed at all the right moments and thought about doors as thresholds and thresholds as other things. That night I took a sleeping pill. It was a dumb move, but I wanted the heavy numbness of an uncomplicated 8 hours. I swallowed it with lukewarm water and brushed my teeth and put my phone face down on the coffee table like a talisman. I dreamed of a hallway again, but this one was short. At the end of it was a door with a frosted window and someone behind it saying, "Please," very softly. I woke up sweating at 2:14 a.m. The room smelled like wet cardboard. There were damp prints on my floorboards, a little trail from the door to the couch. They were very light, as if what had made them was lighter than a person. They went only to the coffee table, to my phone, and then back to the door. My phone screen was on. The voice recorder app was open. The last file was titled 0or14 WAV. I hit play. My voice, thick with sleep, said, "Yes." Then a soft exhale, like someone reaching a hand into a lake in spring. I didn't remember saying yes. I didn't remember waking or walking or opening the door. The chain was still set. The deadbolts hadn't moved. I stared at the damp marks until they dried and didn't look like anything at all and felt like I had imagined them. The next morning, a knock came at the door at 9:03 a.m., daylight wide and normal. When I opened it, a police officer stood on my porch. She introduced herself as Officer Ruiz and asked if I'd seen anything unusual around 3 a.m. "Every night," I wanted to say, and instead, "What happened?" "Break in down the block," she said. No sign of forced entry. The tenant says they woke up and the front door was open. Nothing missing. She raised her eyebrows at that last part like it bothered her in a way theft wouldn't. We're canvassing. I shook my head. Nothing, I lied. She gave me a card. If you think of anything, she said. And I liked that she didn't say call me, just if you think of anything. As if thoughts were things that might suddenly appear where there had been none. That afternoon I checked the porch camera, which had not captured anything at 2:14 a.m. I checked the bell, which had dust on it. I scrubbed the floor where the damp had been, as if that would scrub the memory. I worked on a ticket from home and told a woman in a cubicle 3 towns over to unplug her router and plug it back in, and felt like a fraud. At 11 p.m., Mo texted me a photo. It was my porch, but not. The vantage point was wrong, lower as if taken by someone crouching. The door was half open in the photo, which it was not in real life. The caption underneath was auto-generated by his phone. Memories from this day last year. He followed with, I did not take that, then, this is probably a cash thing. Then, I'm coming over. I thought about telling him not to. I thought about telling him to leave town, to leave me to it like a person who knows they're sick and doesn't want to get anyone else infected. Instead, I said, okay, because I am not brave, only tired. He arrived just before midnight with a duffel bag and an air of a man serious about foolishness. He had chalk and string and salt because he said you may as well diversify your portfolio of protections. He sprinkled a thin line of salt along the inside of the door. He drew a chalk X on the welcome mat, his face serious as a surgeon. He tied the bell to the knob and tested it. If ghosts are real, he said, then maybe ghost rules are real too. At 12:00, the crying started. It was not a question at first, just grief turned into sound. It came from the corner by the hedge and moved toward us. We stood side by side in the hallway. The door closed, the bell still. I imagined her dress dragging in the wet grass, the hem collecting burrs, her hair stuck to her cheek. I imagined her face and stopped, because imagination is a kind of door, too. Please, she said, and she was right outside. Have you seen my husband? It was absurd how every hair on my body stood up like they belonged to a different animal than me. Mo cleared his throat. No, he said calmly, like a person telling a stranger they have the wrong address. The crying cut off. The bell rang once, slower than any hand could move, and the door's lower panel thumped as if someone leaned into it with their forehead. We waited. The bell didn't ring again. The air warmed. My breath came back. We didn't go outside. We didn't look at the mat. We slept on the floor in shifts, and when I woke, the sun was splashing the far wall a confident yellow. On the new rubber mat, cheerful welcome grinned up at us, unbothered. No prints. Mo made coffee and said, maybe that's it. And I didn't say what we both were thinking, that nothing in the past week had been it. He left after lunch. I worked. I set the bell again at dusk, a ritual that felt equal parts holy and stupid. I tried not to look up when the clock moved toward midnight. At 11:57, someone knocked. It wasn't the soft, polite knock from his apartment. It was deliberate and slow. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks, a pause. I didn't move. The knocks came again. I stood and walked to the peephole because apparently I am a person who never learns from movies or life. I looked through the glass. It distorts the peephole, that's the point, to give you a fisheye of the world. It turned my porch into a bowl. At the far end of the bowl, at the bottom of the steps where the shadow starts, something darker than the dark stood. It wasn't even a person shape. It was a density. Please, the voice said, quieter than ever. And the peephole fogged like someone had breathed on the other side of the door. Have you seen my husband? I did not answer. I put my hand on the deadbolt and left it there, not to open, just like a person might put their hand on the shoulder of someone trying not to cry. She said he comes home with dirt under his nails, and there was a long, small sound after that which might have been a laugh, and might have been a tiny piece of something breaking. The bell rang then, but not in the way it had before. Not the simple tug of gravity's patient hand. It chimed a dozen times at once, a bright, foolish silver noise overlaid with itself like a glitch. The chain on the door rattled once. The chalk X on the mat smudged at the top point like something had touched it with a wet thumb. The air tasted like the paper band the grocery store puts around a bouquet. I stood there until my legs hurt. I slept on the floor with my head against the door and dreamed nothing at all. In the morning, the welcome mat was wet around the edges. In the center of the X was a single footprint, perfect as if done by a model maker. It was small and long and not quite human, each toe deeper than the last, the arch high, the heel shallow, the ball of the foot marked with a swirled spiral like a fingerprint. I took a picture. I scrubbed it clean. I threw the mat away. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, the routine holds. At midnight, she cries. Some nights she asks. Some nights she doesn't. When I answer no, the air cools and warms again and my stomach unknots. When I don't answer, the bell rings once, just once, and then not again. I have stopped opening the door. I have stopped looking through the peephole. The cop came by once more to ask if I'd seen anything unusual. I said no, and then had to sit on my hands to stop myself from explaining that no is a kind of spell. Lena asked if everything was okay with the house, and I said great. And she said good. And we both lied with the blunt competence of people who know what is and isn't their business. Ben waves when I walk past the crab apples in daylight and we don't talk about it. At night, if I have to take the trash out after dark, I hum under my breath and keep my eyes on the bins. Sometimes I think about saying yes on purpose, about letting her hold my wrist with that lake and spring cold and seeing what happens when she smiles. We are animals built to finish what we start, even if it's dangerous, even if it's stupid. I think about a trapdoor in the floor of the world that looks like an ordinary threshold, and how a person might step over it in their sleep. I think about husbands and the dirt under their nails and the way grief walks in circles, because it doesn't know the streets anymore. Last night I woke at 3:12 a.m. The house was quiet in a way houses are when they're paying attention. My mouth tasted like I had been digging. My hand hurt. When I turned on the lamp, there were crescent marks in the skin of my wrist. 4 of them, each a little dirty as if 4 small fingers had pressed there and let go. I listened. No crying, no bell. The night had gone back to being a container for the things we don't say aloud. I went to the sink and washed my wrist until it pinked, and the crescents faded, and then stood there with my hands on the cool edge of the counter and looked at the door. I don't know what she is. I don't know what she wants. I know the question and I know the 2 answers and what they cost. I know that some nights, if I sit very still and breathe shallow, I can hear footsteps moving along the hedge at the end of the block, keeping time with my heart like a metronome I didn't set. If you ever find yourself near Ridgeview at midnight and you hear a woman crying, soft like she doesn't want to bother anyone, go home. Shut your door. Do not say yes, even to be polite. And if you must say anything at all, say no the way you'd pull your hand away from a hot stove. And if you can't help yourself and you step close enough to see her face, if you see the way her mouth is shaped around the word please like it's the only word she knows, remember this. Dirt is only dirt until it's carried into your house. After that, it's something you can't sweep away. Tonight, as I'm typing this, the wind has started up in the crab apples. It's not midnight yet. The clock on my stove says 11:47. The house smells normal. The bell is looped over the knob, its little mouth asleep. I'm going to hit post and shut the laptop and sit on the floor with my back against the door, because I'm an idiot, and because I'm tired, and because part of me wants to know which answer I've already given without meaning to. If you try this, don't try this. Remember what Ben said about thresholds. Remember what Mo said about sometimes people really do need help. Remember the way the welcome mat looks cheerful even when it's wet. If she comes early tonight and asks me if I've seen her husband, I will say no, because that's the only truth I have. If the bell rings anyway, if something finds the chalk mark I didn't draw and leaves a print where I can't scrub it, I'll pretend that's normal too. I'll go to bed. I'll wake up. I'll check for mud. And if the footprints start at my bedroom door instead of the porch, if they are small and careful and caked with the kind of dirt that lives deep in the ground and not on top of it, well, I moved here 6 weeks ago and the lease is iron, and she appears in the far corner of the cemetery always at midnight, always weeping. If you approach, she asks, "Have you seen my husband?" Say yes and you'll feel a cold hand on your wrist and she'll smile with a mouthful of dirt. Say no and she vanishes, leaving muddy footprints that lead straight to your door. I know because I am scrubbing them again right now. I am scrubbing and they are not going away. I know how this sounds, and I know the way stories online tend to spiral into something that feels rehearsed. I'm asking you to believe me anyway. I'm not posting this for attention. I'm posting it because Halloween is tomorrow, and if even one person reads this and chooses to ignore the singing, Maybe you'll get a normal November. I didn't. Neither did the people I love. I grew up in a small town called Ashdown Ridge. If you picture something stitched together from a gas station, a diner with a chalkboard pie menu, a hardware store that sells candy at the register, and a cemetery that's too big for the population, yeah, that's us. The cemetery is older than everything else. It sits on a slope behind St. Gertrude's, the church that's more photographs than congregation now, and there's a line of family crypts down the western edge. They're old stone vaults with iron doors that stain your fingers orange if you touch them. Most of the names are almost eaten away. There's a local thing the paper repeats every October, right between the pumpkin carving pictures and ads for the harvest dance. Locals report distant singing, this choir of voices rising from the crypts. It's always written in that playful tone like, "Spooky season is in the air." Some years they quote the same guy, David Mullins, who swears he heard it as a kid and once more after he came back from Vietnam. Soft at first, then louder, he says. Harmonic. Almost beautiful. Then comes the line everyone knows, the line people made into a campfire dare when I was 10. Until one voice stands out, your own. Every kid I knew tried to test it. We'd sneak to the cemetery at dusk, tuck ourselves behind the dry stone wall and hold our breath. The older kids would hum, trying to trick each other. If anyone said they heard themselves, the rest of us laughed. I did too. Except once, when I was 12, I heard something that was very much not a joke. It wasn't my voice, not then. It was my mother's, singing the way she did washing dishes in the kitchen, barely there, shaping the air more than entering it. I told myself someone was playing audio, one of the older kids with a phone and a mean streak. I told myself a lot of things, fast forward. I'm 32 now. I came back to Ashdown Ridge after my dad had a small stroke last winter. It wasn't major, but enough to make him stubbornly independent in a way that meant he needed me. I found a job as a custodian at the elementary school. It's monotonous and honest, and it means I can bring new light bulbs home and fix flickering ones before my dad notices. We live in a small house with a sloped roof and a kitchen window that looks out at St. Gertrude's bell tower, which, if you ask me, is just a giant metronome for disasters. Everything in town happens in sight of that tower. There are 3 people in this story aside from me who matter. My sister Claire, who left for Boston when she was 19, and swore never to come back for more than holidays. She's always been the sensible one, the person who knows the recipe and follows it exactly, the person who tells me I need to schedule a dentist appointment and then schedules it for me. There's also my coworker Jaime, who's 50 going on 17, and who has a talent for making the worst stories feel like they're happening to someone else until they aren't. And there's Pastor Mark, who inherited St. Gertrude's like a haunted house comes with a will. He's a good man who thinks he can bargain with things that don't bargain. This all started in a loud, dumb way, like a firecracker misfires before you realize the fire's in the wall. On October 1st, the Ashdown Ridge Facebook page posted a photo of the cemetery. Fog clung to the grass. The crypts looked like teeth. The caption said, "It's that time again," with a jack-o'-lantern emoji. Underneath, people started sharing memories. We used to bring hot cider and listen. My grandma said they did it during the war. Then someone named Brenda wrote, "Last year my mother heard it in her living room. She said she could hear herself in the alto part." I read that and felt the kind of cold you feel when you step in water inside the house. Brenda lives 3 streets over. I know her mother. She still buys stamps in person. The first night I heard anything was October 10th. It was a Tuesday, and I had just gotten home from a late custodial meeting. Budget cuts, schedule changes, a list of things we were meant to disinfect that already lived their lives disinfected. I was tired. Dad had fallen asleep in his chair with the TV volume turned down so low it might as well have been a painting. I switched it off and heard it. Not singing, not yet. Just a shape of sound outside the window. The way you can tell when someone is talking in another room even if you can't make out the words. I went to the kitchen. The window was cracked. The bell tower looked like a finger pointing at nothing. The sound didn't come from the cemetery. It didn't come from anywhere I could point to. It sat in the air, moving through the house like a draft that remembered you. I listened for a while and it faded. I told myself it was the wind. Jaime says the wind is just a chorus pretending to be weather. 2 nights later, I heard it again. This time it was clearer. Not words, notes. A line of notes that rose, held, and tucked itself back down. I could have hummed it back if you'd asked me. I didn't. I shut the window and stood in the silence waiting for the other half of the trick, some teenager laughing, a car door slamming, an explanation that makes the world normal again. I got nothing. I went to bed, and that was worse. Every creak sounded like a footstep. The house seemed to inhale and exhale with me. On Friday, Jaime and I were stripping old wax off the cafeteria floor when he said, "You hearing the choir yet?" I heard something. Careful. That's how it starts. He straightened up, squinting at the scuffed tile like it had spoken. My aunt says the trick is to hum something else. Throw the key off. If it can't match you, it can't find you. Find me for what? He shrugged. I don't ask quarry questions. I just know October's the month my aunt sleeps with the radio on. I told Claire on the phone that night. She laughed gently, the way she does when she wants to fix me through a line. You're sleep-deprived, she said. You've been dealing with Dad and your work hours are weird. That town has this myth. We grew up with it. Of course you're primed to hear things. What if it's not about the town? I asked. What if it's about me? She was quiet for a second. Then come stay with me for the weekend. I'll buy you a train ticket. We'll drink overpriced coffee and complain about our childhood. I can't leave Dad right now. Bring him, she said automatically, but we both knew he wouldn't come. He said once that cities are just small towns with costume jewelry. He meant it as an insult. That Sunday, Pastor Mark mentioned the singing from the pulpit. He did it in that vague way clergy talk about storms without admitting the roof leaks. This month, we're entering into a time when our senses and our fears might be heightened. There are stories we tell to explain what we can't explain. I'll keep the sanctuary doors open in the evenings if anyone wants a place to sit and be quiet. He didn't say the word choir. Everyone heard it anyway. That night, the singing found me in the shower. Water drummed on tile. Steam curled like question marks. Beneath it, something threaded a melody through the noise. At first, I thought my brain was making it, the way you hear your name in static. Then the water cut off and the sound didn't. It was clearer in the quiet. 3 notes. A pause, 3 more. It felt like being tapped on the shoulder by someone you're not ready to see. I dried off with my heart hammering in my throat and walked down the hall to Dad's room. He was awake. He was staring at the ceiling like he could read a map there. You hear it? I asked. He blinked at me slow. Your mother used to hum that when the radio wouldn't come in right, he said. We'd drive up the ridge until the signal caught. She'd just fill the quiet. That's not Mom, I said, and instantly regretted the edge in my voice. He closed his eyes, hurt threading across his face like another wrinkle. I know. The next day at school, a 3rd grader threw up in a spectacular way that turned the hallway into a crime scene. I mention this because I spent 40 minutes in the janitor's closet filling a 4-gallon bucket at the mop sink, and the room is the size of a coffin's dream. I could feel the choir under the water splash like metal under paint. It wasn't loud. It just cut through. When I stepped back into the hall, the day felt thinner. Colors looked like what they were supposed to be, not what they were. I'm not describing it right. It's hard to explain without sounding like I'm trying to be poetic. The world was the same, but my involvement in it wasn't. Hum something else, Jaime said that afternoon when I told him. We were outside smoking where we shouldn't and pretending we weren't. What do you know? Happy birthday? Take me out to the ball game? I'm not going to sing children's songs at a haunting. Then hum what you're afraid of, he said, serious now. Make a space the size of yourself. That night I tried. I waited until the house settled into its old bones and the highway miles away did that distant, comforting whisper. Then I hummed something from somewhere in my childhood. Just a wandering strand of notes I remembered Mom humming when she canned peaches. The choir rose to meet it, not outside, not from the crypts in me. I could feel it resonate against my teeth. I stopped. It didn't. It followed the shape of what I'd started, turned it beautiful, complicated, bigger. As if a stadium full of people had picked up my tune and perfected it. I bit the inside of my cheek. The copper of blood brought me back to the room. The singing faded. On October 20th, Claire called and said, I'm coming up next week. I miss Dad. I miss you. I want to see the leaves before they turn to sludge. Wait until November, I said without thinking. Come when it's quiet. Ah, she said. So you're hearing it. I didn't answer. I used to hear Mom hum in the bathroom after she died, Claire said, voice steady. It was my own breathe in, breathe out catching on something. That's what it was. But I get it. I'm still coming. She arrived on the 26th in a gray coat that made her look like a responsible ghost. She brought good coffee and a stack of mail I should have sorted months ago. She kissed Dad's forehead and told him he needed a haircut. That night, the three of us ate chili and watched a baseball game none of us cared about. If I tell you it felt normal, will you believe me? It did. Until we turned off the TV. It started in the wall, maybe. No. It started in the part of me that prepares for disappointment. A chord quietly. Claire's head tilted. Don't say it, I said. We sat there like people listen for rain they know will ruin the plans. The chord rose. It wasn't minor or major in any way I know, but it made me ache behind the eyes. Dad started to hum, barely, just like he used to when he tuned the car radio. Claire put her hand on his arm. Dad, he stopped. The chord kept building, adding layers like someone stacking glass. I don't want to hear it, Claire said, and her voice shook on the last word like a loose step. I don't want to hear myself in it. You won't, I lied. It's not about us. We walked to the kitchen. The lights felt too bright. I turned on the faucet to drown the sound and made tea we didn't need. The steam curled. The bell tower outside stood dark. The singing moved from the room to that place behind my nose where headaches begin. It was everywhere and nowhere. Claire swallowed hard and said, We need to do something. What? Earplugs? I don't know. Go to the church? Isn't that what people do when they're haunted? We went, not because we believed a door would fix sound, but because it was a place built to hold listening. Pastor Mark was there like he'd been there all along. He had a lantern on the front steps and a thermos of coffee that tasted like regret. Inside, the sanctuary was warmer than I expected. A few other people sat scattered in the pews, heads bowed or propped on hands. The choir loft was empty and full at the same time. Is it worse this year? I asked low. It's quieter, he said. That's worse. We sat. Claire held my hand. Small bones pressed to small bones we got from the same person. The singing was softer in there, but sharper. It wasn't muffled. It was focused. Pastor Mark knelt in the aisle and started to pray under his breath, in the way of people who name something to make sure it knows it's seen. The words didn't matter. Somewhere behind us, someone began to cry quietly, and then stopped like they were embarrassed. A man I didn't recognize stood up abruptly and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the latch and said, to no one, I hear my father. He can't carry a tune, but I hear him. Then he left. Claire leaned into me. Tell me what you hear, she said. I didn't want to. Saying it made it more present. It's not a hymn, I said finally, but it's built like one. Repeating lines. I think it wants me to pick up my part, like it needs me to make the next step. Don't? She squeezed my hand so hard my knuckles clicked. Please don't, Sam. I didn't. Not then. On the 29th, the town did its harvest fair in the parking lot by the library, like nothing could sing through corn dogs and kettle corn. Kids wore costumes over their coats. Teenagers pretended the cold couldn't touch them. We ran into Jaime at the ring toss with his niece, who had a plastic tiara and a serious throwing arm. He pulled me aside. You look thinner, he said. Like the world's been sanding you for a while. I keep not sleeping. Hum what you're afraid of, he repeated softer. And don't do it alone. Are you hearing it? He looked at his niece, who was concentrating on winning a stuffed pumpkin. I hear my own voice in it sometimes, he said. And I never liked my voice. What does that mean? I think it means if we keep listening, we stop knowing the difference. He shrugged. Hey, there's a hayride up the ridge. I'm going to take her. Come with us. Be loud. We went. It helped. The tractor was a grumbling, unfriendly thing. The wagon was hay bales and laughter and people bumping shoulders in the dark. The trees along the ridge made a tunnel out of the night. When the tractor cut the engine at the top so the kids could stare at the town lights, I felt the world press pause. Silence fell, and in that silence the choir stood up inside me like it had been waiting for us to be quiet together. Multiple voices, many in one. They weren't singing at the cemetery. They were not singing at all. They were allowing us to carry them. On the 30th, I woke at 3:13 a.m. like I'd been called into a different shift. The house was still. On the living room wall, the clock's second hand made its round trip with the confidence of something doing exactly one job. I sat up. The singing was there the way your heartbeat is there when your head's on a pillow. I stood, careful not to wake Claire on the couch or Dad in his chair, and walked to the kitchen. Outside, the bell tower had a thin line of mourning on it that hadn't arrived yet. I opened the back door. This is where I could lie to you. I could say I heard my voice and resisted. That would make me braver than I am. The truth is, I stepped outside and the choir adjusted to include me like a hand opening to make room for a bird. I didn't hum. I didn't sing. But I knew exactly what note I would fill if I did. My tongue found the position of it the way hands find old scars without looking. The first voice that stood out was mine. It felt like standing in front of a mirror you haven't looked at in years and realizing you've been misremembering your face. The sound was me. Not in tone, not in texture, but in intention. My intention? That sounds wrong. I don't have better words. The choir sang a version of me that I had not admitted I needed to be. Braver, sharper, more generous. It braided me into something I recognized. It made an offer. Behind me, someone touched my sleeve. I almost jumped out of my skin. It was Claire, hair flattened on one side, eyes wide.
"What are you doing?"
she whispered. But I could tell from her face she'd heard it too. Not mine. Hers. The way you see someone's gaze tilt toward an invisible friend and you know they're not alone. "Don't," she said. "Don't go where it wants you." "I'm not," I started. And then I didn't finish because the choir lifted. It was like a tide rising, or like everyone in a stadium stood at once. It's hard to describe something that happens inside you and around you at the same time. The air in my throat vibrated even though I wasn't making sound. I could feel how easy it would be to open my mouth and join. Not to add, to complete. I could feel how much it wanted me. Dad spoke from behind us in his rusted hinge voice. "Don't follow a song you didn't start." We all stood on the porch suddenly like a family thinking about weather. Claire took my hand. I took Dad's. We stood there and did the stupidest, bravest thing we knew. We hummed the worst version of Happy Birthday you've ever heard. Off-key, off-tempo. Dad made up words about coffee and baseball. Claire laughed in the middle and the laugh stayed in the tune. It didn't drown anything out. It didn't push the choir away. It put something of us between us and it. When we stopped, I was crying. I didn't know I'd started. The choir receded a bit like it had found the edge of us and stepped back. Halloween has always been the day it's loudest. The town tells itself a story about that the veil is thinnest, that the living and the dead nod to each other across a line. I don't know about veils. I know about repetition. The more people talk about something, the more it makes a place for itself. The more we listen, the more it belongs. The choir doesn't need a veil. It needs attention. That morning, I drove to St. Gertrude's. The church doors were open and a box of votive candles sat by a sign that said, "Suggested donation $1" in the pastor's tidy handwriting. I sat in a back pew and watched the way light through the stained glass made bruises of color on the floor. Pastor Mark came and sat beside me without making me move first. "I think it's not out there," I said. He nodded. "I know. What do I do if I hear myself?" He rubbed his hands together like a man warming cold bones. "There are songs you sing to remember who you are," he said. "And songs that remember you away. Which is this?" "I don't know. I know there's a difference between music we make for each other and music that uses us." He sighed. "I think this town has forgotten how to be quiet without leaving room for something else." We filled the quiet with a story, and the story learned to sing. That night, Halloween, we put a bowl of candy on the porch and sat inside with the lights low. Kids still came, running up the steps like little thunderclouds. I wanted them to eat everything. I wanted them to be heavy with sugar and cartoons. Around 8, the last group came and went, and the house settled into that deep breathing again. I could feel the choir waiting. I don't mean that like a person waits. I mean like a train at the far end of a tunnel. Vibration first, sound second. I looked at Claire. She looked at me. Dad stared at the TV with the sound off. Jaime texted me a picture of his niece asleep with the tiara beside her like a tiny crown had retired. We turned on the radio. Not the Bluetooth kind. The old one in the kitchen with the bent antenna and the red needle that slides across a band of numbers like it's trying to do math. Static. Then a station. Then a preacher promising things. Then more static. Then finally an AM station playing old country songs that sound like porches. We turned it up. The choir rose to meet it, harmonizing with the wrong century. Around 10, the power went out. The house exhaled in the sudden dark. The radio died. The quiet was immediate and deep, like stepping into a lake at night. The choir filled it. I could pick myself out of it instantly. I don't mean my voice. I mean the version of me that wanted to be praised for giving up, for surrendering to something I didn't understand because it felt bigger than me. It was so tempting. You don't realize how heavy your decisions are until someone offers to hold them for you. Claire started humming. I recognized the tune. It was something Mom used to sing on the porch in August. Cicadas loud enough to make conversation optional. It wasn't good. It wasn't even in a key I could find. But it was us. I joined. Dad put his hand on the table and tapped a rhythm like he was counting the church money. Our lousy little song made a shape in the dark that was just big enough for three. The choir adjusted. It didn't fade, it folded. It made space the way the ocean makes space around a rock. And underneath it, for a moment, I heard something I hadn't let myself believe I'd heard since I was 12. My mother's hum. Not because she was a ghost or because the town was special. Because I had put her there all along. Because grief is a song you carry no matter what else is playing. The lights came back. The radio did not. The house felt smaller and safer, and I hate that I was disappointed. That's how it gets you. You start missing the thing that wants to eat your edges. I wish I could end there. With a lesson. With us choosing ourselves and the choir shrinking into folklore. But this isn't a hymn. It's October 31st as I type, and the singing has been following me all day like a friend I should never introduce to my other friends. At the school this morning, a kid cried because he lost his shoe, and the choir braided through his sobs in a way that felt like a hand pushing a head underwater. At the grocery store, an old man tapped his fingers on the cart and accidentally found the rhythm. On the sidewalk outside the hardware store, I paused because a crow on the lamppost opened its beak and nothing came out, and I swear I could hear a note slide into the space where it would have been. Tonight, we'll put the bowl on the porch again. We'll be polite to the kids and to whatever else wanders up our steps. When it gets late, we'll go to the kitchen and turn on the radio. If the power goes out, we'll hum our dumb songs and make a circle with our bad voices and stubborn hearts. I believe that matters. I believe little noises saved on purpose can keep the big noise from taking you. Here's the part I'm writing for you. The person reading this on a screen with your shoulders hunched and your jaw clenched. If you hear it, if you step outside and the night has that hummingbird tension like it's waiting for your next word, don't be brave. Bravery is sometimes just a way of saying yes to a thing that will not love you back. Be small, be off-key. Call someone who will sing badly with you. Fill the air with the music you actually want. Fill your head with the clumsy, stubborn stuff that is yours. Leave less room, because the locals aren't wrong. It is soft at first. It grows louder. It is harmonic and almost beautiful. And then one voice stands out, your own. That's the moment you should know the truth. The song isn't coming from the ground. It's coming from the part of you that waits for permission to disappear. I didn't grow up in a place that had its own ghost story. Where I'm from, you drive past strip malls and retention ponds and nobody points out a tree where a kid once hung himself or a house with a light that never goes out. YouTube filled that gap for me. I watched channels like Mr. Nightmare and Lazy Masquerade while doing dishes, letting those voices wash over me. They never made me paranoid. They made the world feel bigger, like there were pockets of weird out there if you took the right exit. This story is the first time I took the wrong exit. It started because my girlfriend Lena booked us a cheap off-season Airbnb in a tiny Pennsylvania town called Kepler's Ford. It was late October. Her cousin Marco had just gotten laid off from a landscaping company and wanted out of his parents' place for a few days. I do freelance video work, weddings, real estate walkthroughs, and whatever else pays. The plan was to unplug for a long weekend, drink mulled wine, hike, and maybe shoot some moody drone footage of trees changing color. The listing said, Caretaker's Cottage. We laughed. The photos showed a cozy pale blue house with a porch swing, a wood stove, and a stone wall out back with moss on it. I didn't register what caretaker meant until we pulled up and saw the iron fence behind the wall, the hill, and the crooked stones that kept going and going, hundreds of graves tucked into the copper-colored trees. The host, a widow named Ellen Klein, met us with a bundle of wood and a metal tin full of tea bags. She had kind eyes and the kind of soft, careful voice that makes you stand up straighter. She had us sign the guest book. On the hooks by the door were two keys, the house key and another iron key on a leather thong labeled upper. What's the other one for? Marco asked, already smirking. The upper gate, Ellen said. The cemetery. The groundskeeper's been ill. He lets us use it to take a shortcut to the hiking trail. Don't go in after dark, please. The ground is soft this time of year. She said it like it mattered. I nodded. Marco made a fake shocked face behind her back. I pretended not to notice the little framed clipping on the wall above the hooks. It was yellowed and had a picture of the same hill in black and white. Hilltop Cemetery to receive state funds for erosion control, the headline read. Someone had underlined a sentence in pen. Certain old plots on the eastern slope have demonstrated a pattern of subsidence each year around All Hallows. We pretended we weren't looking at it until we were alone. You see that? Marco asked. Old ground sinks, Lena said. It's clay. It shifts. Okay, Professor, Marco said. But did you clock the date? Every year around Halloween? Come on. I laughed it off because I didn't want him to get amped up, but the truth is I had clocked it. And I had clocked how the house's original front room had been a tiny office. There were built-in cubbies labeled with numbers. Some had cards in them with names and plot numbers. It didn't look staged for Airbnb aesthetic. It looked used and then frozen in time. We spent the first day being normal. We hiked, we ate too much. We came home and lit the stove. At night, we went out on the porch and listened to the river move somewhere beyond the trees. It was cozy, and then it wasn't, in the way that a joke stays funny until it's 2 a.m. and the house pops and you realize you're not fully sure where you are. I slept badly. I kept waking because I thought I heard someone tapping on the window glass by the sink. 3 soft taps like the tip of a ring. I told myself it was acorns. In the morning, there were smears of mud on the outside of that window at about shoulder height. A raccoon, probably. I didn't mention it. After breakfast, we used the iron key to cut through the cemetery and find the trail. Up close, the place felt older than it looked from the road. The stones on the lower slope were newer and lined up in neat rows with granite vases and those metal flag holders. But as you climbed, they turned into thin tablets with names that had flaked away. The trees up there were huge, and their roots made the ground swell and dip in ridges. The air had that particular cold that lives in shady places. Near the top, we saw a plot that didn't match. It was a rectangle of earth with no stone at all, just a dent, and a low wooden frame around it like a garden bed. Someone had stuck a cheap white cross at one corner with "Remember" burned into it. There were coins on the soil, pennies mostly, but also a few nickels arranged in a crescent like a smile. In the center, the dirt looked busy. That's the only word I can use. It wasn't smooth like a fresh burial. It was lumpy, torn, restless the way a dog's bed looks after it circles it 3 times. What's this one? Marco asked and stepped closer. His boots left prints where he shouldn't have been. The dirt was tacky and held his tread like cake batter. Lena stopped him. Marco, don't walk on a grave. There's no headstone, he said. That doesn't matter, she said. And he rolled his eyes, but he backed off. On the way back through the gate, an older man in a canvas jacket was locking it from the roadside. He had a tobacco-stained mustache and a plastic grocery bag in one hand. You the folks staying at Ellen's? He asked. Yes, sir, I said. Sorry, we didn't mean to be in the way. Not in the way, he said, but his eyes flicked to the key on my finger like he was counting them. Name's Bell. I look after the place, mostly. Used to be my brother. Now it's me. He lifted the bag. It clinked. What's in there? Marco asked. Phil, Mr. Bell said. He meant dirt. The bag was heavy with it. He was going to the grave we had just seen. He saw us looking and something shifted in his expression, like he had been hoping we'd miss it. Some of the old plots settle, he said. This hill's been moving since before I was born. Water runs under it. I check the soft ones every week in October. Keep 'em decent. He asked us where we were from and if we liked the cottage. He had a pleasant, practiced patter, but when Marco asked, which one is the softest? Mr. Bell said, the one you're thinking of, and turned away from it like a person who had trained himself not to look. That night I did the thing I always do. I took the drone out to the road and got some golden hour shots of the hill. The cemetery from that height looked like a quilt, all the tops of stones showing a pattern. You couldn't tell which plot was the weird one. Later, after dinner, I walked back up with my camera and tripod because you know what I am. I wanted a time-lapse of the stars turning over the treetops and the town lights coming on below. I wanted a thumbnail for a video that might be spending the night in a historic Pennsylvania cemetery, not clickbait. Told myself I'd add a bit about preserving history at the end so it wasn't just me leeching off a place where people were buried, Lena didn't love the idea, but she didn't tell me no. "You'll be quick?" she asked. "2 hours tops," I said. "I'll lock the gate behind me. It's not like I'm going to sit on the graves." Marco was in if I was in. He brought a flask and a headlamp. We locked the upper gate behind us like we were doing something sacred, not dumb. We set the tripod on the path between plots so I could honestly say I never stepped on anyone. I angled the camera to get the hill rolling up into the trees and the distant glow of the river bridge. It was one of those moonless nights where the sky looks soft and close. For the first hour, it was peaceful. The wind snuck through leaves. An owl made a noise like a laugh way back behind the pines. Our breath smoked. At 11:30, my fingers went numb around the tripod handle. I don't remember when my stomach dropped or when the world slid sideways, the way it does when you realize something is actually not okay. It wasn't a sound, exactly, but a change in all the other sounds. The trees stopped creaking at the same time. The leaves that had been pattering down stopped. The owl was suddenly somewhere else. It was like those parts of the night were stepping aside to let something through. Marco felt it too. He stopped mid-sentence and lifted his headlamp, sweeping the beam in a slow pan. I told myself it was the wind changing. I told myself it was the hour, and then I felt another presence. Not a ghost, a person. You know when someone walks into a room behind you and you don't hear them, but your brain fills in their weight? It was that. "Hey," someone said, but it wasn't a voice. It was the way a group of dry leaves make a word by accident. It sounded like hey and like help at the same time. The beam from Marco's lamp slid over the wooden frame around the busy grave and stopped. The soil was moving, not like something burrowing in it. The whole top of it breathed. It flexed and settled, like something under there was rolling its shoulders. Lena was at the gate by then because we had been gone too long. The metal squeak of the hinges cut across the hill and I heard her call our names. She reached us in a minute, breathless, annoyed, then anxious when she saw our faces. I showed her the camera screen. The sensor was pulling everything bright. The top of the grave moved like water when a fish rises. We stood there with our ridiculous gear and our ridiculous words until the church clock across town struck midnight, and the ground let out a long shiver that I felt through my boots. The grave dipped. The wooden frame creaked. Something under the soil pressed up on one spot. Again and again, like a cautious knuckle knocking once. Twice, 3 times. "Someone's in there," Lena said, in that tight voice you get when you want to sound calm but your lungs won't fill right. "That's not possible," I said. It was stupid to say, but it came out of my mouth anyway. "This is an old plot. There's no air." Then the spot where the knuckle had been changed shape. It wasn't a knuckle. It was the back of a hand pushing up, pale as a fish belly. It didn't break through. It made an imprint and then another smaller shape pressed down from above. A matching hand, fingers splayed, pushing back. For a second, I honestly thought we were seeing our own reflections on the screen. That's how clean the shapes were. A hand below. A hand above. Both pale in the infrared. "What is this?" Marco asked quietly. "Animals," I said. "It's got to be animals. Since when do raccoons have hands like that?" He asked. All the air in the world had thinned. I couldn't find a thought that made sense, so I did the dumbest thing. I stepped closer. The beam from Marco's lamp made the soil look like gray felt. The hand underneath pushed up again, deliberate now, testing. The hand above met it and pressed it back. The above hand wasn't real. It was the soil stiffening under a crust, the way a footprint firms up a path. That was my brain trying to hold 2 things at once. A natural explanation and the fact that the print of the above hand had nails. I don't know what would have happened if we had stayed where we were and watched. I don't know if we would have only seen the strange physics of dirt and told ourselves a story about air pockets. But Marco couldn't stand it. He hissed something like "screw this," put his flask down and reached to touch the firmed up spot. The moment his fingers pressed the soil, the entire surface gave like someone inside had been waiting for that weight. It swallowed his hand to the wrist. He made a noise I hadn't heard from him before. That's how I know we'd crossed from spooky to bad. It wasn't loud. It was a small, genuine sound. The sort you make when you get a splinter and look down to see the wood is in deeper than you thought. "Don't pull," Lena said. "Stop, don't pull." I grabbed his elbow. He yanked and the soil tightened. Not hard enough to hurt him immediately, but with a suction that said, "If you fight, I'll fight." I dug my fingers around his wrist to make space and felt cool grit slide against my skin like the inside of a sack. It smelled wet and old. Not rotten. Old. He looked up at me with the sort of panic that makes you 12 again. We pulled together, slow, the way you work a boot out of mud. It let him go in a horrible, polite way, like it didn't want to rip anything. His hand came up slick and gray, like it had been dipped in clay. There were half-moon dents at the base of his fingers. Some belonged to Lena, some didn't. We backed away and didn't stop until the wooden frame was between us and the grave. "Okay," I said. "Okay, we're leaving now, right now." We took the tripod, left the flask on the path like it mattered. The metal squeal of the gate felt like a disrespectful sound. I locked it and the iron key didn't want to turn and then did. We walked to the cottage in that brittle silence you keep when you're trying not to wake a mean sleeping relative. Inside, Marco washed his hand at the kitchen sink until his skin was red. The gray slick clung like a second skin. You had to sort of peel it with your nails. He laughed once, a single breathless burst that sounded like the wrong laugh track over a serious scene. "It's clay," he said. "It's just clay." "Yeah," I said. "Clay that grabs." Lena shut the curtains. She didn't say anything. She doesn't talk when she's scared. She gets practical. She started packing, then stopped herself and made tea because the part of her that runs on rails was still running. We were going to tell Ellen in the morning and leave. That was the plan. We sat at the table with the tea tin between us like a center candle. We did not open the door when someone knocked at 12:17, not 3 taps on the window. A knock, gentle, like a neighbor who doesn't want to wake the baby. "Don't," Lena said when I stood up. She put her hand on my arm and I sat back down because I listened to her when her voice is that quiet. The knock came again, then a voice but not at the door. "Hey," it said, the same leaf voice, from the back of the house, from the wall that faced the cemetery, right above the little office cubbies with their brittle cards. We slept in shifts on the couch and the recliner with the lights on like children. In the morning, the yard smelled like the river and everything looked normal. When we opened the front door, there was a canvas grocery bag full of dirt. It had been set beside the welcome mat with care. We didn't have to tell Ellen. She was already walking up from the drive with her cardigan on inside out. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have warned you not to go up after dark. It gets busy." "Warned us about what exactly?" Lena asked. Her tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't friendly either. Ellen looked at Marco's hand and then at me. "Mr. Bell left you some fill," she said. "He does that when people get curious." It helps." "It helps what?" Marco snapped. He's not usually that guy, but nobody is themselves when they've been held by dirt. "What is that thing up there?" Ellen's eyes moved to the shutters like she was thinking about how sound travels. "It's a problem," she said, "that we live with. The church tried to put in drainage. They tried exhuming 3 adjacent plots. They didn't find much. Some of the old vaults were wood. They rotted. The ground gives. It doesn't like to be empty. We top it up every year, tradition, that's all. So there isn't a person?" I asked, her mouth pinched. "There are people," she said, "but none of them have air. And whatever you think you saw, sometimes the old clay crusts over. It makes faces and hands. It plays tricks, then who knocks?" Lena asked. Ellen smiled, a kind of tired smile, and shook her head like we were sweet. "Old houses knock. Don't be silly, we left anyway. We didn't fight her. We thanked her for the tea. We got in the car and drove the long way out of town so we wouldn't have to pass the church. The road curled along the river and then up into pines and then out to the main highway where everything is billboards. None of us said the word grave. We said things like, "That was weird," and "What was that?" And "Do you think that was real?" The way you put bubble wrap around something you don't want to break you. I wasn't going to look at the footage. That was my line. I told myself I would delete the card without loading it, chop the memory up and feed it to the recycling bin. Lena asked me not to watch it in a simple voice. Marco told me to send it to him if I did in a different, harsher voice. I procrastinated like a champ for 2 days. Then, because I am myself, I set the camera on my desk, plugged it in, and opened the folder. If this was a movie, the footage would have been blank, or it would have been fine until midnight and then corrupted. It wasn't. It was normal. It was boring and then it wasn't. You know the part already, the hill, the stars, the clock striking, the soil rising and falling. Then the hand pressing up and the hand pressing down and our little circle of light and our 3 human shapes. Except it wasn't 3. In the wide shot, there were 4. It was so obvious I felt stupid for not seeing it at the time. There was me behind the tripod. There was Marco in his headlamp reaching. There was Lena a pace back, her hand on my jacket. And there was another figure at the edge of the frame, a little downhill, almost swallowed by the dark. Same size as me, Same jacket as me, same shape of head, not like a twin. Like a mirror where no mirror should be. When Marco reached in and the soil took him, the figure on the edge moved at the exact same time, hands forward like he was grabbing something we couldn't see. When we pulled Marco free, the figure on the edge leaned back in unison. Then it straightened, and I swear to you on my dead father that it turned its head and looked directly into the camera, which was 10 feet away and did not make a sound and has no eyes. I paused and zoomed, and the pixels broke into squares. The shape of it looked right. The jacket looked right. But the face wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone I knew. It wasn't even a face exactly. It was like clay that wanted to be a face trying. I scrapped the idea of editing it into a video. I thought about dropping the SD card in a glass of water and watching the label curl. Instead, I drove to a little strip mall church where a friend of a friend worked and asked if I could talk to the pastor. I told him I had questions about grief and burial and if old graves ever acted up. He was in his 30s and kind and didn't make me feel crazy. He told me the ground moves because ground moves. He told me stories he'd heard about streams under hills that flood and do weird things to coffin hardware. He told me there are plenty of true, normal reasons for why you might see what looks like a hand in compressed clay. Then he said, "Some places have rituals to make everyone feel better about it, though. Dirt is one of them. Coins are another. They're ways of saying the earth is closed." "The earth is closed," I repeated like it was a phrase from a manual. "Don't laugh," he said. "You don't know who you're talking to when you say it." A week later, a small box came in the mail. No return address. Inside was the iron key on the leather thong labeled upper. Beneath it was a card from the caretaker's cubby room, the size of a recipe index, cream with a thin blue line. The ink had bled over the years, but the numbers were legible. Section E, Row 7, Plot 19. In the name field, someone had written unknown in block letters, and then erased it hard enough to tear the paper. Underneath, in pencil so soft it was almost wish, was one word: borrowed. I called Ellen. Her number rang to a full mailbox. I found the church office and Mr. Bell listed in the same directory, but his voicemail said he was out to a family issue. I told myself not to get in the car. I set the key on the shelf above my desk like a novelty. I told myself to go back to my normal life. On Halloween at 11:58 p.m., someone knocked at my apartment door. It was the polite knock again. 3 soft raps as if whoever it was had been told to be gentle. I stood with my palms flat on the kitchen counter and did not move. The knock came again at 12:03, and again at 12:17. Each time 3 taps. Each time I did not move, I didn't sleep. In the morning, when I opened the door to get the mail, there was a canvas bag full of brown-blue soil. The bag had dampened the cheap welcome mat into a shape that looked like a handprint. I dumped it onto the ivy under my window. It made a small mound that sat too tall for its size and then slowly settled like a sigh. You learn to live with things. People live over subway lines and don't hear the trains. You get used to the knock. You get used to the way your phone vibrates once without a notification. At 12 a.m. on certain nights. You get used to keeping more coins in your pocket than you used to, and leaving them at the base of hedges and street lamps without quite knowing why. I don't know what that grave is, or what it wants, or what exactly happens in the soil when the church clock strikes 12. I don't think it's a monster. I think it's a place that keeps its own time. Maybe the hill takes an inventory once a year. Maybe it opens its mouth to count and closes it again on whatever happens to be at the edge. I know this. The year after we left Kepler's Ford, the town paper ran a very short story about a tourist who had gone missing. He'd been staying alone. He liked to walk. He'd posted a video of the cemetery at sunset. They found his rental car unlocked. They didn't find much else. I didn't show Lena that piece. She asked me once, driving past a garden center, if we should get more soil for the planter on the balcony. I said no without thinking, and the word came out harder than I meant. She looked at me sideways. I told her I'd had a dream where dirt filled the house like fog, but that wasn't the whole truth. On the card from the cubby, there was a line I hadn't noticed until a month later. On the back, very faint like a transfer from the card that had been beneath it at some point, were the last 5 letters of some other plot's name. MORR. That could be Morris or Morrison or something else. I remember because when I was a kid and we moved apartments a lot, my mom used to write more on our boxes with a Sharpie to stand for more later. She'd write it big across the cardboard when she was tired. It was her promise to herself. That's what this feels like. Not a haunting that ends. A note written on the side of a still open box. The grave opens itself and something below puts a hand up and something above meets it. And every year they check on each other. You keep walking. You try not to be there when the checking happens. You tell yourself the earth is closed. Last week, the iron key wasn't on the shelf where I left it. I thought I'd lost it. I tore the place apart because the idea of it lying around unaccounted for made my chest hurt. I found it eventually in the pocket of the jacket I wore the night at the cemetery. I haven't worn that jacket since. I don't remember putting it there. The leather thong smelled like river mud and pennies. I don't know what good it does to tell this. Maybe it's like the coins in the fill. A superstition with a job to do. Maybe I'm asking you not to go up on a hill after dark if you happen to be traveling near Kepler's Ford. And the leaves are down and the church clock is about to strike. Maybe I'm hoping someone local reads this and says, oh, that old thing. The solution is X and here's why the ground makes hands. Or maybe it's like when you shake the blanket before you lay it down. You do it even if there aren't any crumbs. You do it just in case. You whisper the words because someone told you they matter. The last time I slept deeply was in August. I dreamed I was lying on my back under cool weight like a weighted blanket. In the dream I knew with relief that I wasn't trapped. The pressure above me wasn't crushing. It was holding. When I woke up there was dirt under my nails again. Not much. Just a dusting. Like I'd pressed my hands into a new bag of potting soil and forgotten. Halloween is tonight. I live 3 hours from Kepler's Ford in good traffic. I'm not going back. I'm going to turn my phone off at 11:50. I'm going to put 3 coins on the ivy just like last year. I'm going to tell myself the earth is closed, the earth is closed, the earth is closed. And at midnight somewhere on a hill with trees older than me, the ground will move anyway. A neat rectangle of soil will rise and fall like a sleeping chest. A hand will push patient as a tide, and another will reach up to meet it. Then if I am lucky, they will both decide it isn't time. The lid will settle. The coins will stay. For another year, the grave that opens itself will remember how to be still.